I am Adeline, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant who spent my entire life balancing the books for everyone else. I went to the hospital to visit my sister's newborn. I brought a ridiculous luxury gift, eager to celebrate. But when I pushed the door open, I found my husband sitting on her bed, kissing her forehead. I froze as my sister asked if the baby would have his last name. My husband smirked and said her husband was just the idiot paying the hospital bill, and I was just the ATM funding their lifestyle. Then my sister laughed, calling it poetic that the barren workaholic was paying for the baby she could never have. I did not cry. I stayed silent, walked back to the hallway, threw the gift in the trash, and opened my laptop. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the people who should have loved you the most. The maternity ward of Seattle General Hospital smelled of industrial cleaner and cheap flowers. I walked down the brightly lit corridor, carefully balancing a massive gift box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a custom cashmere baby blanket and a silver rattle that cost more than my first car. I had spared no expense for my sister Chloe. She was the undisputed golden child of our family, the beautiful younger sister who had always gotten whatever she wanted. She had married Marcus, an incredibly successful African-American architect who treated her like absolute royalty. Everyone thought Chloe had the perfect life, the perfect marriage, and now the perfect baby boy. I was the sensible older sister, the pragmatic numbers girl who worked 80-hour weeks tracking down hidden assets and corporate fraud for the federal government. My husband Julian and I had been trying to have a baby for 4 agonizing years. We had gone through 3 brutal rounds of in vitro fertilization. Each failure had chipped away at my soul. Julian had always played the role of the supportive, grieving husband perfectly. He would hold my hand while I cried over negative pregnancy tests, telling me that it was just the 2 of us against the world, and that my career was our real legacy. He convinced me to keep working hard to keep bringing in the massive checks from my accounting firm so we could afford more treatments. I believed him completely. I reached room 412 and paused. The door was cracked open just an inch. I shifted the heavy silver box in my arms, preparing to put on my best smile. I knew this visit would be painful. Seeing Chloe holding the baby I so desperately wanted was going to tear my heart open, but I was the older sister, and I had a duty to be happy for her. I nudged the door with my shoulder, expecting to see Marcus hovering over his new son. Instead, the breath left my lungs. Marcus was not in the room. My husband Julian was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed. His back was to the door, but I recognized the custom-tailored suit I had bought him for his birthday. He was leaning forward gently, brushing a stray lock of blonde hair behind Chloe's ear. He leaned down and pressed a long, lingering kiss to her forehead. It was not a friendly kiss. It was deeply intimate, possessing a terrible familiarity that made my stomach drop into a bottomless pit. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the silver box so tightly my knuckles turned white. My brain desperately tried to find an innocent explanation, but then Chloe spoke and the illusion of my entire life shattered. "He is going to have your last name, right?" Chloe asked, her voice dropping into a whiny, petulant tone I knew all too well. "We cannot actually put Marcus on the birth certificate. It is your baby, Julian." Julian chuckled softly, trailing his hand down her cheek. "Of course he will have my name eventually," he said. "But for now, Marcus is just the idiot paying the hospital bill and buying the diapers. Let the architect drain his bank accounts for our son." "But what about Adeline?" Chloe asked, adjusting the sleeping newborn in her arms. "She is going to start asking questions about where you spend your time." Julian scoffed, the sound dripping with absolute contempt. "Adeline is clueless. She is too busy staring at spreadsheets and crying over her useless ovaries to notice anything. She is just the ATM funding our lifestyle until we are ready to cut her loose. The second I get my payout from her firm, we are leaving." A cold, sharp silence filled the space between my ears. I could not breathe. I could not move. The man I had loved, the man who had wiped my tears after every failed pregnancy, was sitting mere feet away, casually discussing how he had fathered a child with my sister. Chloe let out a high-pitched giggle that sounded like breaking glass. "It is poetic, is not it?" she sneered. "The barren workaholic pays for the baby she could never have. It is honestly what she deserves for always thinking she was smarter than everyone else. At least her money is finally going toward a real family." The words slammed into my chest like physical blows. The barren workaholic, the ATM, the idiot paying the bill. They were entirely comfortable destroying Marcus, a man who adored Chloe, and destroying me, a woman who had funded Julian's life. They felt entirely justified in their grotesque betrayal. I expected to fall apart. I expected the familiar sting of tears to blur my vision. I expected to burst into the room screaming and throwing the heavy box at their faces, but the tears never came. The devastation I felt for a few agonizing seconds rapidly crystallized into something else. It turned into absolute freezing calculation. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my days dismantling the lives of white-collar criminals, tracing every stolen dollar and exposing every hidden lie. Julian and Chloe thought I was just a blind, desperate woman. They had forgotten what I actually did for a living. I stepped back from the door, moving silently. I walked down the hallway until I reached the large industrial trash can near the nurse's station. I looked at the luxury gift in my hands. I lifted the lid and dropped the $2,000 silver box directly into the garbage. It hit the bottom with a hollow thud. I walked out of the maternity ward and took the elevator down to the parking garage. When I got into my car, I did not turn the key. I pulled my phone from my purse. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened my secure banking application and stared at the joint accounts Julian and I shared. The accounts filled entirely by my income. Then I opened my encrypted work portal. I had access to federal tracking tools, real estate databases, and global financial networks. Julian thought he was walking away with my money to start a new life with my sister. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was about to find out that a woman who traces money for the federal government leaves absolutely no loose ends. I typed my password and pressed enter. The hunt had officially begun. I turned away from the nurse's station and walked toward the elevator banks. My posture was perfectly straight. My breathing was controlled and even. Years of interrogating hostile executives and investigating corporate fraud had taught me how to lock my emotions in an impenetrable mental vault. Right now, I was not a betrayed wife. I was an investigator, and Julian was my primary suspect. The elevator chimed, the stainless steel doors sliding apart. Before I could step inside, a familiar cloud of heavy, expensive perfume assaulted my senses. My mother, Brenda, marched out of the elevator car. She was clutching 3 oversized designer shopping bags and wearing a scowl that deepened the moment her eyes locked onto me. Brenda did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was doing. Her gaze immediately dropped to my empty hands. "Where is it?" she demanded, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet hospital corridor. I stared at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "Where is what, mother? Do not play coy with me, Adeline. The bugaboo stroller. I specifically texted you the exact model and the exact color Chloe wanted. It cost $2,000, and you promised you would bring it to the hospital today." I never promised anything. I had simply stopped replying to her relentless, demanding text messages. But Brenda always interpreted my silence as submission. That was the dynamic of our entire relationship. I was the bank, and Chloe was the beneficiary. "I did not buy it," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I threw my gift in the trash." Brenda gasped, her manicured hand flying to her chest in theatrical horror. "You selfish, bitter girl. Your sister just went through hours of grueling labor to give this family a beautiful baby boy, and you show up empty-handed out of pure spite." I looked at the woman who had birthed me. I saw the same woman who had secretly co-signed a disastrous commercial lease for Chloe's failed boutique, expecting me to bail them out when the business inevitably went bankrupt. I saw the woman who constantly reminded me of my biological failures. "You are punishing your own sister just because your body does not work," Brenda hissed, leaning in close, so only I could hear the venom in her words. If you cannot give me grandchildren, the absolute least you can do is properly spoil your sister's baby. You have a moral obligation to this family, Adeline. You make more money than your father ever did. Do you have any idea how much financial pressure Chloe is under right now? I knew exactly how much pressure Chloe was under. I also knew she was currently upstairs resting comfortably with my cheating husband. I am not buying a $2,000 stroller, I replied, my tone dropping to a freezing whisper. I am keeping my cash liquid. I am going to need it for retainer fees. Brenda recoiled, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in confusion. Retainer fees? What on earth are you talking about? Are you suing someone? You are acting completely unhinged. You have become a jealous, miserable spinster, Adeline. Your obsession with your career has ruined your mind. I stepped past her into the empty elevator car. I turned around and faced her as the doors began to slide shut. Enjoy your new grandson, Mother, I said smoothly. He has Julian's nose. The doors clicked shut on Brenda's confused, enraged face, leaving her alone in the hallway. I rode the elevator down to the underground parking garage in total silence. When I reached my car, I locked the doors and finally let out a long, shaky breath. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, threatening to let the crushing weight of reality crash down on me. I refused to let it happen. I plugged my phone into the dashboard interface, bypassing my personal contacts and opening my secure financial applications. Julian and I shared a primary joint savings account. He had always insisted on combined finances from the very beginning of our marriage. He claimed it was a symbol of ultimate trust and unity. In reality, it gave him unrestricted access to my high six-figure income while he bounced between mediocre tech jobs. I thought about his recent termination 3 months ago. He had come home angry, claiming the company culture was toxic and that he had mutually agreed to part ways with management. My forensic instincts had tingled then, sensing a lie in his defensive posture. But I had chosen to trust my husband. I had silenced the professional auditor inside my brain to protect my marriage. That was a mistake I would never make again. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage, merging onto the busy Seattle highway. Rain began to fall, slicking the windshield and mirroring my cold resolve. I needed to get to my home office. I needed my desktop monitors and my encrypted software to properly tear apart Julian's digital footprint. Suddenly, a sharp chime echoed through the car speakers. It was a high-priority push notification from our primary wealth management portal. I safely pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, my tires crunching against the wet gravel. I hit the hazard lights and grabbed my phone with both hands. The alert flashed across the screen in bright red letters. Wire transfer initiated. Amount $100,000. Status pending approval. I stared at the numbers. $100,000. It was nearly all of our liquid cash reserves. I tapped the notification, diving deeper into the transaction details. I looked at the destination routing number and the receiving account information. The money was being wired to an unfamiliar limited liability company registered in Delaware. It was a classic textbook shell company structure, the exact kind of corporate ghost entity used to hide assets, launder money, and make cash disappear without a trace. Julian was trying to drain our savings. He was sitting in a hospital room playing the doting uncle to his illegitimate child, using his smartphone to quietly steal my hard-earned money to fund his escape with my sister. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his plan was breathtaking. He actually believed I would not notice a six-figure transfer. He believed I was too distracted by my own grief to monitor the ledger. He had miscalculated horribly. I tapped the screen, navigating past the pending transfer screen and moving directly into the primary security settings. I bypassed the standard fraud alerts and accessed the administrative control panel. A prompt appeared on the screen asking if I wanted to report suspicious activity and lock the account. I smiled, a sharp predatory smile that did not reach my eyes. I selected the option to freeze all assets associated with the entire portfolio. The application asked for a final confirmation warning that neither party would be able to withdraw, transfer, or access funds until a formal review was conducted. I hit confirm. A solid red banner dropped across my phone screen. Account frozen. Please contact your branch administrator. Julian was officially cut off. He had absolutely zero access to my money. He could not wire the cash to his shell company. He could not buy a cup of coffee. He could not fund his secret life with Chloe for one more second. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, put the car back in gear, and pulled onto the highway. Julian was going to come home soon, furious and demanding answers, and I needed to be ready for war. I parked my car in the driveway and walked into our very quiet house. I set my keys down before the front door slammed open. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. Julian stormed into the kitchen. His face was a mask of manufactured outrage, his styled hair disheveled. He slammed his briefcase onto the quartz countertop, making me flinch internally, though. I kept my face blank. "What is wrong with the bank?" he demanded, his voice echoing. "I just spent 45 minutes calling customer service. They told me you initiated a hard freeze on our primary accounts. Do you know how embarrassing it was to have my card declined while buying lunch?" I leaned back against the kitchen island. "I did initiate a freeze, Julian. I received an alert about a massive wire transfer. $100,000 is not a lunch purchase." Julian sighed, running his hands through his hair, shifting into his favorite role of the patient husband, dealing with an irrational wife. "Adeline, you are completely overreacting. I was setting up an education fund for my new nephew. I wanted to secure the child's future. It was supposed to be a surprise. A surprise," I repeated deadpan. "You were going to surprise me by draining our savings account today." "We are family," Julian snapped, stepping closer, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Families help each other. You have been obsessed with fertility treatments and work, completely neglecting your sister. Somebody had to step up. I am the head of this household, Adeline. I make the financial calls when you are too emotionally compromised to think straight." I watched him perform. It was truly a masterclass in gaslighting. Had I not stood outside that hospital door 2 hours ago, I might have apologized. But looking at his lying face, I felt nothing but a cold, surgical precision. I opened the top drawer of the kitchen island. I pulled out a single sheet of paper I had printed from my federal database minutes before he arrived. I slid it toward him. "You are the head of the household?" I asked smoothly. "Since when?" Julian looked down at the paper. The color drained from his face instantly. His domineering posture vanished into a terrified stillness. It was a termination notice. "You were fired from your tech firm exactly 3 months ago," I stated, walking around the island to stand directly in front of him. "You did not mutually part ways. You were escorted out by corporate security. You embezzled nearly $2 million from your employer, Julian. You have been under federal investigation for 90 days. Did you really think a forensic accountant would not eventually look into her own husband's financial discrepancies?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He stared at the letter like it was a venomous snake. "I know exactly where that $100,000 was going," I continued, my voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "It was not going into an education fund for your nephew. It was going into a shell company registered in Delaware. A shell company designed to hide stolen money. You were funneling my hard-earned cash to Chloe so the two of you could fund your escape plan." Julian stepped back. The mask of the loving, misunderstood husband melted away completely. His eyes darkened, and his lip curled into a vicious sneer. He did not bother denying the embezzlement. He did not bother denying his relationship with my sister. He went straight for the throat. "You are insane!" Julian spat, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. "You are a paranoid, barren workaholic who is completely disconnected from reality. You think you are so smart because you play with numbers all day. But you are nothing. If you do not unfreeze that account right now, I will file for divorce tomorrow morning." I stood my ground, maintaining direct eye contact. "Go ahead and file, Julian." "Oh, I will," he threatened, stepping into my personal space. "And because we live in a community property state, I will take half of everything. I will take half of this house, your retirement, and your precious accounting firm. I will leave you with absolutely nothing, Adeline. You will pay alimony to the man who gave your sister the baby you could never carry." He expected me to break. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg him to stay. He expected the desperate woman who had endured years of failed fertility treatments to surrender. Instead, I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that caused Julian to falter. His eyes darted across my face, searching for the weakness he was so accustomed to exploiting, but finding only a terrifying calm. Before Julian could issue another empty threat, the sharp chime of the front doorbell echoed through the hallway. The sudden noise broke the heavy tension in the kitchen. Julian glared at me, his chest heaving with suppressed rage. I turned away from him and walked down the hallway toward the front door. I checked the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on our front porch was Marcus. Chloe's husband wore a sharp charcoal suit, looking exhausted but impeccably put together. He was here to thank me. He was here to show his appreciation for the sister-in-law who supported his wife during her pregnancy. He had no idea his wife was a parasite, and he had no idea the man he considered a friend had just fathered his supposed son. I stared at the monitor, watching Marcus shift his weight patiently on the porch. A new brilliant strategy formed in my mind. Julian wanted to threaten my firm. Chloe wanted to steal my husband and my money. They thought they had the upper hand because they deceived me, but they betrayed Marcus too. I looked back down the hallway at Julian. Marcus was my ultimate weapon. I unlocked the door. Marcus stood on the wet porch holding a ridiculous woven basket overflowing with artisanal muffins. His face was lined with the heavy exhaustion of a new father, but his smile was genuine. I took the basket with steady hands, smiled a practiced and polite smile, and told him Julian was deeply contagious with a sudden stomach bug and could not receive visitors today. I thanked him for his kindness and promised to call him later that week to discuss a highly lucrative financial audit I wanted to propose for his architecture firm. I watched Marcus drive away, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife and his closest friend were actively destroying his life. I had secured my ace in the hole. I shut the heavy front door, engaged the deadbolt, and immediately reprogrammed the smart locks from my mobile phone. Julian spent the night locked out, hammering his fists against the door before finally retreating to sleep in his car. I did not sleep. I spent the next 10 hours turning my kitchen island into a tactical war room. By 6 in the morning, the pristine quartz countertop was completely buried under printed ledgers, bank statements, and corporate filing documents. I drank my fourth cup of black coffee, my eyes burning from staring at multiple glowing monitors in the dim light. The financial web Julian and Chloe had woven together was complex, but it was also incredibly sloppy. I had successfully traced the $2 million Julian had embezzled from his former tech firm. The stolen funds were systematically dispersed across 5 different shell companies, all registered in Delaware, and all listing Chloe as the primary managing director. They were not just stealing my personal money. They were using my sister's fake business credentials to launder stolen corporate funds. They were actively planning to purchase a luxury estate in Aspen, completely funded by federal fraud and my own blind ignorance. I was just finalizing the digital evidence package for the federal authorities when the harsh sound of metal scraping against metal broke the quiet morning silence. The front door handle clicked heavily. I had reprogrammed the electronic keypad the night before, but I had completely forgotten about the physical emergency key I had given my parents 4 years ago. Heavy, hurried footsteps echoed down the hardwood hallway. My father Richard stormed into the kitchen, followed closely by my mother Brenda. Richard's face was purple with rage. He gripped his heavy wooden cane tightly, his knuckles stark white, his chest heaving under his golf polo. Brenda stood right behind his shoulder, clutching her overpriced designer handbag, her face twisted into a mask of supreme indignation. They did not knock. They did not announce themselves. They simply invaded my home like they held the deed to my life. Richard slammed his cane down hard against the imported hardwood floor, the loud crack ringing out through the kitchen like a gunshot. "How dare you cut off your sister's support fund?" he roared, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at my face. "You owe this family. You dropped out of your Ivy League law program. You're a disgrace. The sheer blinding audacity of his words ignited a fire in my chest that had been smoldering beneath the surface for over a decade. Every holiday insult, every ignored achievement, every single time they had chosen Chloe over me rushed to the forefront of my mind. They expected me to shrink. They expected the obedient, pragmatic daughter to lower her head and apologize for protecting her own assets. I looked at the cold, half-empty ceramic coffee mug resting dangerously near the edge of the island. I swept my hand violently across the counter. The mug launched off the edge, crashing into the floor and shattering into 100 sharp, jagged pieces. Dark coffee splattered across the pristine white cabinets and stained my father's expensive leather loafers. Both of my parents jumped back in absolute shock. They had never seen me lose my temper. I didn't drop out. I shouted, my voice tearing through the kitchen with a ferocity that shook the window panes. I switched to accounting because you stole $150,000 from my tuition trust to bail out Chloe's failed boutique. Don't you dare play the victim. The silence that followed was utterly deafening. My father's mouth hung open. He looked at Brenda, desperately searching for a defense, but there was absolutely none to be found. They had assumed I never knew the truth about the trust fund. They assumed I had believed their lies about the market crash wiping out my educational savings when I was 20 years old. They did not realize that a forensic accountant eventually audits her own history. "You are being completely unreasonable," Brenda finally stammered, stepping out from behind my father's shadow. She puffed out her chest desperately, trying to regain her typical aura of maternal authority. "Your sister needed that capital. You were always smart enough to figure things out on your own. Chloe is delicate. She requires emotional and financial support. And right now, Julian is providing that support because you are too cold and bitter to be a proper loving wife." I stared at my mother, marveling at the dark, twisted gymnastics of her logic. She knew. She knew about Julian and Chloe. She knew my husband was funneling stolen money to her golden child, and she fully supported the betrayal. "You are harboring a federal criminal," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Julian embezzled $2 million. He is going to federal prison, and your precious daughter is going down as his primary accomplice. I have every single wire transfer printed right here on this island." Brenda did not look at the documents. She did not look panicked, and she certainly did not look ashamed. Instead, a slow, malicious grin spread across her heavily powdered face. She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. She slapped the paperwork down onto the kitchen counter right on top of my financial ledgers. "Julian was right," Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial pity and venom. "Your infertility has made you psychotic and a danger to yourself." I looked down at the document. It was an emergency psychiatric hold petition. My own parents and my cheating husband had conspired to have me committed to a psychiatric ward to discredit my findings and gain immediate power of attorney over my finances. They were trying to lock me away in a padded room before I could expose their massive coordinated fraud. A piercing, high-pitched wail suddenly cut through the walls of the house. I looked past my mother, staring through the large front windows of the living room. Bright red and blue lights flashed aggressively against the glass, illuminating the morning shadows. Sirens wail outside. Police cars pull up to the driveway. Heavy fists pounded against the solid oak of my front door. The synchronized, aggressive knocking was not a request for entry. It was a demand. I did not move immediately. I stood amidst the shattered ceramic and spilled coffee, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint my living room walls. Brenda wore a look of triumphant vindication. Richard leaned heavily on his cane, a sneer of pure contempt carved into his weathered face. I stepped around the mess and pulled the front door open. Two uniformed police officers stood on my porch, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Flanking them was a woman in a beige trench coat holding a thick clipboard. She possessed the aggressively gentle posture of a crisis intervention worker. Before any of them could speak, Julian stepped out from the shadows behind my mother. He had not been sleeping in his car. He had been waiting for his reinforcements to arrive. He pushed past the officers and entered the hallway, his face twisted into a mask of profound, agonizing sorrow. He looked at the shattered coffee mug on the floor, then looked at the social worker with tear-filled eyes. You see what I mean? Julian said, his voice trembling with perfectly manufactured devastation. She is completely out of control. She has been destroying the house. She locked me out all night in the freezing rain. The woman in the beige coat stepped forward, her voice dripping with the kind of syrupy condescension usually reserved for frightened toddlers. Adeline, my name is Susan. I am a county psychiatric evaluator. Your husband called us this morning deeply concerned about your safety. He says you are experiencing a severe manic episode and suffering from intense paranoid delusions. I looked at Julian. He was trying to establish a temporary emergency conservatorship. It was a brilliantly malicious legal maneuver. If he could convince a judge I was in immediate danger to myself due to a psychotic break, he could seize temporary absolute control over my medical and financial decisions. He could bypass the fraud alerts, unfreeze the accounts, and wire the embezzled funds to Chloe before I could legally defend myself. He needed me heavily sedated and locked in a 72-hour psychiatric hold to finalize his theft. He tells me you believe he is stealing millions of dollars from your workplace, Susan continued, taking a slow, cautious step toward me. He also mentioned you are having delusions about him carrying on an affair with your own sister. Adeline, we know you have been struggling with infertility. That kind of prolonged medical trauma can severely fracture a person's grasp on reality. We just want to get you some help. We want to take you to a safe facility where doctors can adjust your brain chemistry. Brenda chimed in from the kitchen, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch. She has lost her mind. She was screaming about stolen tuition money from a decade ago. She is entirely disconnected from reality. Please take her away before she hurts someone. We are terrified of her. Richard slammed his cane against the floorboards again for emphasis. She is sick. She needs a padded cell. Julian reached out, attempting to place a comforting hand on my shoulder. His eyes were wide with fake, tragic sympathy. I need to take over your affairs, honey, just until you get better. I am the head of this household, and I need to protect our assets from your madness. We can get you a nice, quiet room at the state facility. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them a single ounce of the hysterical reaction they desperately needed to validate their fabricated narrative. As a federal auditor, I knew that whoever controls their emotions controls the room. Susan, I said, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with the social worker. I am going to walk slowly to the wall safe located behind that painting in the living room. I am going to retrieve my identification and some medical documents. My hands will remain entirely visible. The police officers tensed their hands, gripping their duty belts, but I moved with deliberate, unthreatening slowness. I swung the framed landscape canvas aside, punched in my 6-digit code, and pulled open the heavy steel door. I reached inside the dark compartment and retrieved 2 specific items I had kept secured for exactly this kind of catastrophic emergency. I walked back to the entryway and handed the first item directly to Susan. It was a heavy gold shield encased in black leather. I am a senior forensic auditor for the federal government, I stated, my voice echoing off the hardwood floor with absolute chilling authority. I hold a top-secret security clearance. I undergo rigorous mandated psychological evaluations every single year to maintain my federal status. I passed my last psychiatric screening with perfect marks exactly 14 days ago. Susan stared at the federal badge, her patronizing smile instantly evaporating. The 2 police officers suddenly stood up straighter, shifting their posture from authoritative to highly respectful. Now I continued, holding up the second item. I handed Susan a thick stack of pharmaceutical receipts and sealed medical transcripts I had discovered hidden in Julian's golf bag 3 months prior. Julian is indeed describing a severe mental breakdown. However, he is projecting his own diagnosis onto me. Those are Julian's active prescriptions for severe narcissistic personality disorder and acute manic paranoia. He has a documented history of erratic behavior, which culminated in him being terminated from his corporate employment for financial embezzlement 90 days ago. Julian lunged forward, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. Give me those. Those are private. Both police officers immediately stepped between us, putting their hands firmly on Julian's chest and forcing him back. He is attempting to falsely commit a federal employee to bypass a bank freeze on stolen assets, I told the officers, crossing my arms. I highly recommend you escort him and my parents off my property before I have my field director press federal charges for filing a fraudulent emergency petition and wasting municipal resources. Susan looked at the psychiatric medications, looked at my federal badge, and then glared at Julian. The color completely drained from Julian's face. He knew he had overplayed his hand. He had brought local authorities into a federal jurisdiction, and he was staring down the barrel of severe legal consequences. Mr. Wilson, one of the officers, said, his hand resting securely on his radio. I suggest you pack a bag and leave the premises immediately. If we receive another false call to this address, you will be leaving in handcuffs. Brenda and Richard stood frozen in the kitchen. The utter humiliation of watching their grand trap spectacularly backfire rendered them entirely speechless. Julian did not say a word. He grabbed his coat from the rack, his hands shaking with impotent rage, and shoved his way past the officers out the front door. My parents hurried after him, their heads ducked down in shame. "Mom." The authorities apologized to me profusely for the intrusion. Susan handed back my badge and Julian's pill bottles, her cheeks flushed with deep embarrassment. They walked out to their vehicles, leaving my house quiet once more. I watched the police cruisers back out of my driveway. As the flashing lights faded down the street, I noticed a figure standing perfectly still at the edge of my lawn. Marcus had not driven away. He had been sitting in his car down the street, reviewing architectural blueprints before heading to his office. The wailing sirens had drawn him back. He stood holding a folder of design plans, staring at the departing police cruisers with a look of profound, utter confusion. He walked up the driveway. His brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the shattered coffee mug visible through the open door. "Adeline," he said, his voice laced with heavy concern. "Are you all right? What on earth is happening here?" I stepped out onto the porch. I looked at the man who had loved my sister, the man who was currently paying for Julian's child. I grabbed Marcus firmly by the arm, my grip tight and unyielding. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper, "we need to talk now." I pulled Marcus firmly across the threshold and slammed the heavy oak door shut before my parents or Julian could realize what was happening. I immediately engaged the deadbolt and let him pass the shattered coffee mug and the dark stains on the kitchen floor. I did not offer him a drink or an explanation. I walked him directly down the hall into my home office. It was a windowless, temperature-controlled room secured by a biometric lock. I scanned my thumbprint, pushed the heavy solid steel door open, and motioned for him to sit in the dark leather guest chair positioned opposite my desk. Marcus collapsed into the seat like a man carrying the weight of the world. He dropped his rolled architectural blueprints onto the floor and rubbed his bloodshot eyes with the heels of his hands. He looked completely hollowed out. His usually pristine charcoal suit was rumpled, his tie hung loosely around his collar, and a thick shadow of stubble covered his jaw. "I am so incredibly sorry to intrude on whatever family drama is happening out there, Adeline." He sighed, his voice raspy and thin. "I just wanted to drop off those muffins to thank you for checking on Chloe at the hospital yesterday. She has been so demanding lately. I am working 80-hour weeks at the firm right now, just to cover the ridiculous luxury postpartum demands she keeps adding to my credit cards." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling in pure exhaustion. She insisted she needed a private wellness nurse, a holistic chef, and a dedicated lactation consultant to properly recover from the delivery. "I have barely slept since the baby was born. I am drowning in work, but I am just trying to be a good husband. I want to give her everything she needs." I looked at this decent, hardworking man. He was destroying his own physical and mental health to fund the lavish lifestyle of a woman who was actively planning to run away with my husband. My chest tightened with a fleeting pang of empathy, but I pushed the emotion aside. Compassion would not help Marcus right now. Pity would not save him from the financial ruin they had planned for him. He needed the brutal, unfiltered truth. I walked behind my heavy mahogany desk and opened the locked bottom drawer. I bypassed the stacks of corporate ledgers and pulled out a plain white sealed envelope. You are a good husband, Marcus, I said, keeping my tone entirely surgical and precise. But Chloe is not a good wife, and Julian is not your friend. Marcus blinked, his exhausted brain clearly struggling to process my sudden shift in demeanor. What are you talking about? He asked, sitting up slightly. Did Julian invest in one of Chloe's crazy business schemes again? Because I told her we do not have the liquid capital for another boutique venture. I did not answer him verbally. I walked around the desk and handed him the envelope. I suggest you open this, I said. He took the envelope, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He slid his index finger under the flap, tore it open, and pulled out the single sheet of thick paper. It was a certified laboratory report from a private genetic testing facility located just outside the city limits. When I visited Chloe at the hospital yesterday, I was not there to offer my loving support. I explained, watching his tired eyes scan the complex medical terminology. I was there to collect a biological sample. I took a spare pacifier from the baby's bassinet when Chloe was distracted by her phone. I matched it against hair follicles I pulled from Julian's styling comb in our master bathroom. I paid the laboratory an exorbitant fee for an expedited premium overnight processing. Marcus froze. His breathing stopped completely. His eyes locked onto the bold, black text printed clearly at the very bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. The silence in the soundproof office was instantly suffocating. Marcus stared at the paper as if it were written in a terrifying foreign language. His hands began to tremble violently. The crisp, white paper shook between his fingers, the rustling sound amplifying the devastating quiet of the room. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking into a desperate plea. "No, this is wrong. This is a clerical mistake. He is my son. I was in the delivery room, Adeline. I held her hand. I cut the cord." "It is not a mistake, Marcus," I said softly but firmly, refusing to let him retreat into denial. "Julian and Chloe have been sleeping together for over a year. Julian embezzled $2 million from his tech firm to fund a massive shell corporation entirely in Chloe's name. They were planning to take the stolen money, take the baby, and leave us both with absolutely nothing. You were funding her postpartum retreat while she finalized her escape with my husband." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The architectural blueprints on the floor were completely forgotten. The sheer exhaustion on his face morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. A ragged, guttural sob tore from his throat. He dropped the laboratory report onto his lap, buried his face in his large hands, and wept. He wept for the son he thought was his own flesh and blood. He wept for the marriage that had been revealed as a complete sham. He wept for the profound betrayals layered so deep they defied basic human decency. I stood silently by my desk, giving him the necessary space to mourn his murdered life. I knew exactly how that initial paralyzing shock felt. I had survived it standing outside a hospital room just 24 hours ago. Now I needed him to survive it. After several long, agonizing minutes, the heavy sobbing stopped. Marcus lowered his hands and wiped his face. When he looked up at me, the devastated, exhausted father was completely gone. In his place sat a man consumed by a cold, terrifying rage. His bloodshot eyes were dead and unblinking. The raw sorrow had been instantly incinerated by a burning, calculated desire for absolute vengeance. He picked up the DNA test from his lap, folded it sharply, and slid it into his breast pocket. "Julian and my parents just tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward to gain immediate control of my finances," I stated plainly, laying out the battlefield. "They think they can manipulate the legal system to walk away wealthy and unpunished." Marcus stood up. He smoothed his wrinkled tie and squared his broad shoulders. The exhaustion had entirely vanished from his posture, replaced by a rigid, dangerous energy. "They want to play with the law, fine," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "What's the play, Adeline? I want to destroy them." I gestured for Marcus to take the leather chair opposite my desk. He moved mechanically, his movements stiff and heavily deliberate, like a man navigating through deep water. I walked over to the digital whiteboard mounted on the far wall of my office. I picked up a black marker and drew a stark dividing line right down the center of the pristine white surface. I wrote Julian on the left side and Chloe on the right. I capped the marker and turned back to Marcus. Grief makes people sloppy, I explained, keeping my tone deliberately clinical to ground the surging emotions in the room. But greed makes them entirely predictable. We are dealing with two profound narcissists who genuinely believe they are the smartest people in the room. They are operating under a very specific set of assumptions regarding our respective wealth. We are going to weaponize those exact assumptions. Marcus stared at the whiteboard, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle feathered violently under his skin. Chloe thinks my architecture firm is a community asset, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm and devoid of its previous warmth. She has been relentlessly pushing me to put her name on the deed to the commercial property we just acquired downtown. She calls it securing the baby's legacy. She brings it up every single night. I nodded, recognizing the textbook maneuvering. Exactly. She is trying to anchor herself to your fixed assets. And Julian believes he is legally entitled to half of my forensic accounting firm, my federal pension, and the massive amount of equity in this house. He tried to have me committed to a psychiatric ward this morning because an emergency medical hold would grant him immediate power of attorney. He wanted to drain my liquid assets to fund their escape before I could legally defend myself or file for divorce. They both want the maximum payout with absolutely zero liability. I walked back to my desk, pulled a fresh legal pad from the heavy mahogany drawer, and slid it across the surface toward Marcus. They are expecting a chaotic war of emotion, I told him, tapping the pad. We are going to give them a silent war of attrition. To do that, we need to completely ghost your finances. We have to strip your visible net worth down to the studs without triggering a single marital asset alarm. If Chloe suspects you are moving money or hiding capital, she will file for divorce prematurely and petition the court to freeze your business accounts. Marcus picked up a silver pen from the desk. Tell me how to build the firewall. I smiled. It was the cold, analytical smile of an apex predator circling its prey. You are going to create an irrevocable blind trust, I instructed, leaning forward. But we are going to do it through a highly complex corporate restructuring loophole. You own 60% of your architecture firm. You are going to sell a minority stake of your voting shares to a silent partner. Marcus frowned, his analytical mind searching for the flaw. I do not have a silent partner lined up. Any sudden sale will look incredibly suspicious to a divorce judge. You do now, I replied smoothly. I have a dummy shell corporation established from an old undercover federal audit. It is entirely clean, legally bulletproof, and practically invisible to standard civilian background checks. My corporation will purchase 20% of your firm at a significantly undervalued rate, citing the current economic downturn in the commercial real estate sector. We will meticulously backdate the initial email negotiations to 6 months ago, long before the baby was born. The massive influx of capital from that sale goes directly into the irrevocable trust, which will be strictly managed by a third-party fiduciary based in the Cayman Islands. I watched Marcus process the legal architecture of my plan. The heavy fog of betrayal was lifting, replaced by the sharp focus of a man building a fortress. I am an architect, he murmured, nodding slowly as the pieces clicked into place. We rezone commercial properties to avoid heavy municipal taxes all the time. You are rezoning my wealth. Precisely, I said. Chloe will eventually notice a dip in your personal liquid cash, but you will blame it on standard business overhead, supply chain issues, and a bad financial quarter. By the time we drop the hammer and reveal the truth, your personal net worth will be legally isolated and untouchable. She will walk away from your marriage with nothing but the clothes in her designer closet and a massive mountain of credit card debt. Marcus leaned his elbows on his knees, his eyes dark and calculating. And what about Julian? What happens to the man who fathered the child sleeping in my nursery? Julian has already handed me his own execution warrant, I replied, tapping the digital evidence file glowing brightly on my computer monitor. He embezzled $2 million from his former tech firm. I am currently feeding that forensic data directly to the federal authorities, but we are not going to arrest him yet. If he goes to federal prison today, Chloe immediately plays the victim. She plays the deceived, innocent, struggling single mother. We absolutely cannot allow her to control that narrative. They need to go down together publicly and catastrophically. I walked around the desk and stood directly in front of him. But to make this entire operation work, I need you to do the hardest thing you have ever done in your entire life. Marcus did not flinch. Name it. You have to go back to that house, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. You have to walk through your front door, kiss your lying wife, and hold that baby. You have to play the exhausted, doting, completely oblivious husband. You cannot show a single crack in the facade. If you show anger, if you show disgust, Chloe will sense the shift in your behavior. She will warn Julian and they will scramble to hide their tracks. You have to perform flawlessly. Marcus swallowed hard. His gaze drifted to the floor for a fraction of a second. I saw the ghost of the loving father flicker, fight for breath, and finally die in his eyes. When he looked back up at me, his expression was carved from solid, unforgiving granite. I can do it, he stated with absolute chilling certainty. I will smile. I will play the oblivious fool. I will gladly hand her my credit cards and thank her for being a wonderful, devoted mother. I will give her the performance of a lifetime. Good, I said, admiring his ironclad resolve. Because we need them to feel entirely untouchable. Narcissists always make their fatal mistakes when they believe they have already won the game. We need them to spend money they do not actually have. We need them to aggressively climb to the very top of the social ladder so the inevitable fall breaks every single bone in their bodies. Marcus let out a dark, humorless chuckle. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face, entirely devoid of any former warmth. You want them to spend money? He said, his voice dripping with pure venom. Chloe just texted me an hour before I arrived at your door. She is demanding a sip-and-see baby introduction party at the elite country club downtown. She wants custom ice sculptures, imported vintage champagne, and a live string quartet. She claims it is essential for networking. It will cost at least $50,000. I felt a genuine thrill of anticipation run down my spine. The pieces were falling onto the chessboard exactly where I needed them to be. I looked at Marcus, matching his dark, predatory smile. Give it to her, I replied effortlessly. Let Julian pay for it. Marcus left through the back door, slipping into the alleyway to avoid drawing attention. The house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a battleground of emotional betrayal. It was a highly controlled federal sting operation. I spent the next hour cleaning up the shattered coffee mug and wiping down the quartz island. I needed the kitchen to look perfectly normal. I needed to look like a woman who had spent the entire morning crying, completely broken by the overwhelming weight of her own supposed mental instability. I rubbed my eyes hard until they were red and bloodshot, splashed cold water on my face, ruffled my usually pristine hair, and waited. The wait was exceptionally short. At precisely noon, the heavy deadbolt clicked open. Julian had managed to convince a local locksmith to bypass my emergency reprogramming, claiming his irrational, medically unstable wife had locked him out during a severe psychiatric episode. He stormed into the foyer, his heavy footsteps echoing with aggressive, unchecked entitlement. He did not look like a man who had spent the morning thoroughly humiliated by local police officers. He looked like a man seeking absolute domination. He found me sitting at the kitchen island, my shoulders slumped forward, my hands folded neatly in my lap. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if I had calmed down. He marched directly up to me, his face twisted into a snarl of absolute contempt. He slammed his fist onto the clean quartz countertop, causing the remaining coffee cups to rattle. Unlock the primary accounts right now, Adeline, he demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening register. I am completely done playing these pathetic, paranoid games with you. You embarrassed me in front of the police. You embarrassed me in front of your own parents. If you do not log into that banking portal and restore my financial access, this exact second, I am calling my lawyers. I will file for a brutal, scorched earth divorce by 3 o'clock this afternoon. I will drag your professional name through the mud, take half of your precious accounting firm, and leave you paying me alimony for the rest of your miserable life. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face, relying on his sheer physical size to intimidate me into submission. He was expecting me to argue. He was expecting the righteous, indignant forensic accountant who had thrown him out hours earlier. He wanted a screaming match, so he could continue justifying his narrative of my total mental collapse to my parents and the authorities. Instead of fighting back, I let my lower lip tremble. I looked up at him with wide, bloodshot eyes and allowed a single perfectly timed tear to spill over my lashes and roll down my cheek. I pulled my shoulders in tight, making myself appear physically smaller, entirely defeated and broken. "I am so sorry," I whispered, my voice cracking with manufactured devastation. I buried my face in my hands, letting my shoulders heave with fake racking sobs. "I am so incredibly sorry, Julian. You are right. You are absolutely right. I have been completely out of my mind." Julian froze. His aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second, completely disarmed by my sudden total surrender. He watched me cry, his inherent narcissism quickly feeding on my display of absolute weakness. The tension drained from his jaw as he realized he had won. I looked up at him, wiping my wet cheeks with the back of my trembling hand. "The infertility treatments, the stress at the firm, finding out about your corporate termination. It just broke me. I panicked. I let my paranoia completely take over. I thought you were leaving me. I thought you were hiding money because you hated me. I was so terrified of losing you that I sabotaged everything. Please, Julian, please do not divorce me. I cannot lose you too. I will do whatever you want." His expression morphed from aggressive fury to smug paternalistic superiority. He let out a long theatrical sigh, playing the role of the exhausted, magnanimous husband dealing with his hysterical wife. He reached out and patted my head, a deeply patronizing gesture that made my skin crawl, though I leaned into his touch like a desperate, starving animal seeking comfort. I opened the top drawer of the island. I pulled out a sleek black leather card holder. Inside sat 3 brand-new high-limit platinum credit cards. I pushed the leather case across the counter toward him with a shaky hand. "You're right," I said, maintaining my tearful, broken facade while looking up at him through wet eyelashes. "I've been stressed. Take these for the baby's party. I know Chloe wants a sip and see. I know she needs to network. I want you to handle it. I want you to have whatever you need to make it perfect. Just please forgive me for being so crazy this morning." Julian snatched the leather card holder off the quartz countertop with lightning speed. He didn't hesitate. He didn't question the sudden miraculous windfall. His overwhelming greed instantly blinded him to any potential trap. He slipped the platinum cards into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket, his chest puffing out with victorious arrogance. He offered me a tight, condescending smile, told me to get some rest and take my medication, and immediately turned on his heel. He walked out the front door without another backward glance, eager to plan a $50,000 luxury party for his mistress. I watched the door click shut behind him. The tears instantly dried on my face. My trembling hands went perfectly still. I stood up, my posture straightening as the pathetic broken wife persona instantly evaporated. I walked back down the hallway to my secure home office and booted up my federal auditing terminal. Julian was completely unaware of what he had just put in his pocket. Those platinum cards were not tied to our joint personal savings. They were not connected to my corporate accounting firm. They were directly routed to a highly restricted, federally monitored corporate shell account that I was actively auditing for a massive federal wire fraud investigation. He thought he was spending my personal wealth to impress his mistress and her wealthy social circle. In reality, every single vendor he paid, every custom ice sculpture he ordered, every bottle of imported champagne he purchased, and every single swipe of that platinum card was pinging directly to a secure server at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was not just funding an extravagant baby shower. He was meticulously building his own federal indictment, sealing his absolute destruction, one luxury transaction at a time. Across town, inside the sprawling, custom-built modern estate Marcus had designed specifically for his growing family, the atmosphere was thick with manufactured exhaustion and staggering entitlement. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling architectural windows, illuminating the wide plank oak floors and the carefully curated designer furniture. Chloe lounged across a custom white velvet chaise, swathed in an imported silk robe that Marcus had purchased for her during a business trip to Milan. She looked entirely perfectly rested, yet she sighed heavily. pressing the back of her manicured hand against her forehead in a display of profound maternal fatigue. Brenda sat opposite her on a leather accent chair cradling the sleeping infant. She gently stroked the fine dark hair on the baby's head, her face glowing with absolute adoration. Richard stood by the custom wet bar Marcus had built, pouring himself a generous measure of 20-year-old single malt scotch that he had not paid for. "Look at those perfect high cheekbones," Brenda cooed softly, adjusting the incredibly expensive organic cotton blanket around the child. "He clearly gets his superior genetics from our side of the family. He has your beautiful eyes, Chloe. He is absolutely flawless." Richard took a slow sip of the amber liquid, savoring the expensive burn before nodding his agreement. "He is a strong boy. He is going to be a leader. It is a blessing Adeline is not here to cast her negative energy over him. She would probably find a way to criticize the way he sleeps." "Did Julian text you about the absolute spectacle she caused this morning?" Chloe reached for a crystal glass of sparkling water on the side table, rolling her eyes in dramatic exasperation. "Julian texted me right after he left the house. He said she had a complete hysterical mental breakdown. She was screaming and crying on the kitchen floor. He had to physically take over her financial accounts just to keep her from ruining them both. She is completely unhinged. I am honestly terrified for him to be living in that house with her." Brenda tutted disapprovingly, shaking her head as she rocked the baby. "Adeline has always been selfish and unstable. Do you remember when you were teenagers? You were out building important social connections, joining the right clubs, making the right friends. Adeline just sat in her room, hoarding her allowance and obsessing over her grades. She lacks your natural warmth, Chloe. She lacks your grace. Julian is a saint for putting up with her paranoid delusions for this long." Chloe sighed again, a sharp, petulant sound that cut through the quiet luxury of the living room. "I just wish Marcus was around more to help me. He is always at the firm. He left before dawn this morning. Julian is so much more attentive to the baby. He actually understands what I need right now. He checks on me constantly." The living room went perfectly still for a fraction of a second. The blatant, careless slip of the tongue hung in the air, a glaring red flag waving wildly in the pristine space. Brenda froze, her eyes darting nervously toward Richard, before she quickly plastered on a bright, overly enthusiastic smile to smooth over the massive indiscretion. "Julian is simply a wonderful, dedicated uncle, darling," Brenda said, her voice a pitch too high, rushing to cover her daughter's tracks. "He is just stepping up because your sister is too cold and bitter to participate in normal family joy. He is filling the void her jealousy created. We are just lucky to have such a supportive man in the family." Richard cleared his throat loudly, rattling the ice in his crystal glass. "Exactly. Julian knows the value of family. Marcus is a good provider, but he is a workaholic. You need emotional support, Chloe. You are doing the hardest job in the world." Outside in the hallway, standing perfectly still behind the massive mahogany entryway pillar, Marcus listened to every single word. His hand gripped the strap of his leather briefcase so tightly, his knuckles were bone white. A roaring, violent fire raged in his chest, a desperate urge to kick the door open, rip the glass from Richard's hand, and throw all three of these parasitic monsters out onto the street. He wanted to scream the truth until his vocal cords bled. But he remembered Adeline's cold, surgical voice in the windowless office. He remembered the digital line drawn down the center of the whiteboard. He remembered the strategy. Grief makes them sloppy. Greed makes them predictable. Marcus closed his eyes, inhaled a long, shaking breath, and buried the furious, devastated father deep down inside a lightless vault. When he opened his eyes, they were clear, bright, and completely devoid of the crushing betrayal he had discovered only hours ago. He adjusted his collar, pasted a warm, exhausted but loving smile onto his face, and stepped into the sunlight of the living room. "There are my two favorite people in the entire world," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the perfect pitch of an oblivious, doting husband returning from a long day at the office. Chloe immediately offered him a practiced, exhausted pout. "You missed the holistic lactation consultant, Marcus. I had to handle the entire session by myself. It was incredibly draining." Marcus crossed the room, bypassing Richard and Brenda entirely. He leaned down over the velvet chaise and kissed Chloe gently on the cheek. The scent of her expensive jasmine perfume hit his senses, a scent he now knew Julian had purchased for her birthday 2 months ago. It took every ounce of his willpower not to physically recoil. "I am so sorry, sweetheart," Marcus said, keeping his tone light and deeply apologetic. "I know I have been working crazy hours lately, but I was not just at the firm today. I was securing something very special for you." He stood up, reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket, and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope embossed with gold foil. He handed it down to her. Chloe sat up slightly, her curiosity piercing through her fake exhaustion. She slid her manicured finger under the seal, pulled out the thick stack of premium paper, and scanned the top page. Her eyes went wide. She gasped, a high piercing sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. "The Oak Ridge Country Club." Chloe shrieked, looking up at him with unblinking shock. "You actually secured the Grand Imperial Ballroom for the Sip and See party." Marcus smiled, playing the role of the perfect ultimate provider flawlessly. "Nothing but the absolute best for my beautiful wife and my son," he said smoothly, looking directly into her eyes. "It is going to be the social event of the season, and you do not have to worry about planning a single detail. Julian actually called me this afternoon and offered to coordinate all the vendors so I can focus on my architectural firm. I gave him full authorization to handle the catering, the custom ice sculptures, and the decor." Chloe squealed in delight, throwing her arms around his neck and pressing her face into his chest. Brenda clapped her hands together in sheer joy, nearly waking the sleeping infant in her arms. "Oh, Marcus," Brenda gushed, her eyes shining with greedy approval. "You are spoiling her absolutely rotten, but she deserves every bit of it after everything she has been through." Richard nodded approvingly from the bar, raising his glass of stolen scotch in a silent salute. Marcus patted Chloe's back gently, staring blankly over her shoulder at the vaulted ceiling he had designed with his own hands. He listened to her squeal about the vintage champagne she was going to order and the elite guest list she was going to assemble. Chloe went back to admiring the luxurious contract, eagerly running her fingertips over the thick, expensive paper. She was completely blissfully unaware that the signature on that venue agreement was not the only legal document Marcus had executed that afternoon. While she had been lounging on the velvet chaise complaining about his absence and praising Julian's attentiveness, Marcus had been sitting in a sterile, heavily secured law office on the other side of the city. He had been quietly and efficiently finalizing the paperwork for a fault-based annulment due to severe marital fraud. Let them plan their party. Marcus thought, his smile remaining perfectly fixed as he watched his wife plot her social ascent. Let them climb as high as they possibly can. The fall is going to be spectacular. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, a hollow echoing sound that barely penetrated the solid steel door of my home office. The only light in the room came from the harsh blue-white glare of my triple monitor setup, casting long, sharp shadows across the mahogany walls. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rapid percussive clacking the only other sound in the dead of night. Julian had been swiping the platinum cards with reckless, euphoric abandon all evening. I sat back and watched the transactions hit the secure server in real time. $10,000 to a boutique event planner, $5,000 to a specialty florist, $8,000 to a custom bakery and ice sculptor. Every single authorization pinged the FBI surveillance grid I had established. He was leaving a digital blood trail a mile wide, completely blinded by his own narcissistic need to play the wealthy benefactor for my sister's extravagant sip and see party. He thought he had bullied a broken woman into submission. He thought he was untouchable. But the party expenses were just the appetizer. The platinum cards were the bait required to monitor his active network connections. While he was logged into his phone making these massive luxury deposits, I was quietly reverse engineering his connection. I bypassed his consumer-grade virtual private network in under 4 minutes. He thought he was a technological genius because he worked in corporate software sales, but he was dealing with a senior forensic auditor for the federal government. I did this for a living, and I was very good at it. I traced the data packets directly to a series of encrypted offshore accounts he had been actively accessing from his phone. The routing numbers led me straight to the Cayman Islands. It was a classic, spectacularly uninspired choice for an amateur embezzler. I initiated a deep packet inspection, pulling the incorporation documents for the specific shell companies receiving the stolen $2 million from his former tech employer. I expected to find Julian's name hidden behind layers of proxy directors. I expected to see a generic corporate holding group managed by some shady offshore legal firm. What I found made my hands stop typing completely. The primary holding company receiving the embezzled corporate funds was registered as Lux Lifestyle Interiors, LLC. I pulled the state registry files and the federal tax identification documents. There, sitting in plain sight on the digitized PDFs, was the sole proprietor's signature, Chloe Evans, my sister. A memory flashed in my mind, vivid and infuriating. Last Thanksgiving, sitting around my parents' dining table, Chloe had spent 20 minutes loudly boasting about her booming new interior design consultancy. She had worn a smug, pitying smile as she looked at me across the roasted turkey and crystal glasses. "You really should let me redecorate your house, Adeline," she had sneered, swirling her wine. "Your style is so rigid and government issue. I am pulling in 6 figures a quarter with my private clients. It is amazing what you can achieve when you actually have creative vision instead of just crunching boring numbers all day." My mother had chimed in immediately, praising Chloe's entrepreneurial spirit and loudly suggesting I take notes on how to be a modern, successful woman. The truth was entirely different. Chloe did not have any private clients. Lux Lifestyle Interiors was a phantom entity. It was a perfectly constructed washing machine for dirty money. Julian had stolen $2 million from his tech firm, and Chloe was issuing fake invoices for non-existent design consultations to clean the cash. The money was then funneled into the Cayman accounts to sit safely out of reach. My sister was not just a traitor who had slept with my husband and bore his child. She was an active, willing accessory to federal wire fraud and international money laundering. I dove deeper into the ledger, my eyes scanning the hidden transfers Julian had made over the past 18 months. He had disguised them as business expenses and charitable donations, skimming off the top of our joint savings to pay the initial incorporation fees for Chloe's shell company. I cross-referenced the dates of the transfers with my own personal calendar. The breath left my lungs. On the exact day I received the call that our third round of IVF treatments had definitively failed, a day I spent sobbing uncontrollably on the bathroom floor, Julian had wired $50,000 to Lux Lifestyle Interiors. He had held me while I wept over our inability to have a child, knowing he had just funded his pregnant mistress's fake business with our shared money. The sociopathy was absolute and chilling. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. They had tied themselves together in a criminal conspiracy carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. And they had done it while actively trying to destroy the life of a woman who possessed the exact security clearance and specific skill set required to dismantle them piece by piece. I did not feel shock anymore. I did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal that had brought me to my knees just days ago. I felt the cold, precise focus of an executioner preparing the block. I opened a new encrypted folder on my secure hard drive. I began dragging and dropping the evidence. The IP logs, the transaction receipts from the sip and see party, the Cayman Island routing numbers, the forged design invoices from Lux Lifestyle Interiors, the state registry documents bearing Chloe's signature, the DNA report confirming Julian's paternity of Marcus's supposed child. Every single lie, every stolen dollar, every arrogant misstep was meticulously categorized and cross-referenced. I initiated the transfer to a military-grade encrypted flash drive. The progress bar inched across the screen, a slow, steady march toward their inevitable ruin. 90%, 95, 100%. The drive chimed, signaling the compilation was complete. I pulled it from the USB port. It felt heavy in my palm, a small rectangle of metal containing the literal end of Julian and Chloe's lives. I opened my secure federal communication portal. I bypassed the standard chain of command and opened a direct classified line to Special Agent Vance at the FBI White Collar Crime Division. Vance had been my primary contact on a massive corporate fraud bust 2 years ago. He knew my work was infallible. I did not type a greeting. I did not offer pleasantries. My fingers struck the keys with deliberate heavy force. I have the ledger. Warrants required. The digital confirmation pulse flashed on my screen, locking the transmission. Vance would move quickly. He always did. I closed the terminal and leaned back in my chair, allowing the silence of the early morning to wash over me. The federal gears were finally turning, but the domestic war was far from over. By noon the next day, my phone buzzed with a peremptory text from my mother. It was not a request, it was a summons. She demanded my presence at Le Petit Chateau, an obscenely overpriced French bistro downtown that catered exclusively to the city's pretentious elite. I knew exactly why I was being called. Julian had undoubtedly briefed them on my tearful submission, and like sharks smelling blood in the water, my parents were circling to take their bite. I arrived exactly on time. I wore a tailored navy sheath dress and maintained a perfectly neutral expression. Brenda and Richard were already seated at a prime corner table. Richard was swirling a glass of expensive Bordeaux. Brenda was adjusting her silk scarf, her eyes scanning the room to ensure she was being seen by the right people. "Sit down, Adeline," my father ordered, bypassing a greeting entirely. He did not look at me. He signaled the waiter for another round of drinks. I took the seat opposite them, placing my purse on the empty chair. "You wanted to see me." My mother leaned forward, adopting a tone of magnanimous forgiveness. "Julian told us about your little episode yesterday." She began, her voice dripping with condescension. "He said you finally recognized how terribly you have been treating him. He also mentioned you gave him access to the platinum accounts to handle Chloe's sip and see party. That was a good first step, Adeline. Admitting you have a problem is the only way to heal." I kept my face perfectly smooth. "I am trying to make amends," I said quietly. "Good," Richard grunted, setting his wine glass down with a heavy thud. "Because you owe your sister a massive apology. Chloe is dealing with severe postpartum stress, and your erratic, jealous behavior is not helping her milk supply. Marcus's family is incredibly prestigious. They are flying in from Boston for the baby introduction. We need to present a united, wealthy, flawless front. We cannot have them thinking we are common." I nodded slowly, playing the repentant daughter. "What does presenting a flawless front require, Richard?" Brenda clapped her hands together, her eyes gleaming with absolute greed. "A push present," she announced brightly. "Marcus is working himself to the bone at his firm, and frankly, men just do not understand these societal expectations. Chloe needs something substantial to show his family that she is valued. She has her heart set on a brand new Porsche Macan. Pearlescent white, custom leather interior." I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of the demand settle into the air between us. "You want me to buy my sister a Porsche? It is the absolute least you can do." Brenda snapped, her fake warmth vanishing instantly. "You have been hoarding your accounting firm's profits for years while your sister struggles to build her design consultancy. You owe this family. Julian is already bending over backward to plan this party because you were too selfish to step up." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the two people who had raised me. They had spent my entire life weaponizing my achievements and rewarding my sister's spectacular failures. They were actively assisting in the dismantling of my marriage. They were enthusiastically cheering on the theft of my assets. And now they wanted me to buy the getaway vehicle. "No," I said. The single syllable dropped onto the pristine white tablecloth like a lead weight. Richard's face instantly flushed a mottled, dangerous crimson. Brenda gasped, placing a dramatic hand over her chest. "Excuse me," Richard growled, leaning across the table until I could smell the sour wine on his breath. "What did you just say to me?" I said no. I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, losing every trace of the submissive daughter they expected to bully. "I am not buying Chloe a luxury vehicle. I am not funding her vanity. You can tell her to drive the sedan she already has." "You ungrateful, miserable little girl," Brenda hissed, leaning in close so the neighboring tables would not hear her venom. "This is exactly why Julian was driven away. This is why you are alone. You are completely incapable of generosity. Richard slammed his palm flat against the table. The silverware rattled sharply. You are going to pay for that car, Adeline. We took out a second mortgage on our house to pay for this party because you are too stingy. You will reimburse us. I paused. The air in my lungs froze. I stared at my father, my analytical mind instantly dissecting his furious confession. You took out a second mortgage to pay for the party, I repeated slowly, ensuring I had heard him correctly. Julian was supposed to use my platinum cards to cover the entire event. Richard sneered, a vicious, triumphant look crossing his weathered face. Julian told us you froze the cards this morning. He said your paranoia flared up again and you locked him out of the accounts right when the venue demanded the final deposit. He was humiliated. I had to step in like a real man and secure the capital. I leveraged the equity on the family home to get $50,000 in cash so your sister would not be publicly embarrassed by your petty, vindictive financial games. You will reimburse us for every single penny of that loan plus the car. I looked down at the table to hide the absolute predatory joy flaring in my eyes. Julian had not been locked out of the platinum cards. The FBI had simply flagged and frozen the fraudulent shell accounts he was trying to wire the money into. Panicked and desperate to keep up his wealthy facade for Chloe, Julian had successfully manipulated my arrogant, financially illiterate father into footing the bill. My parents had just mortgaged their entire future to pay for a fake party designed to cover up a federal crime. I slowly looked back up at my father. I let a soft, genuine smile curve the edges of my mouth. A second mortgage on the family home, I asked, keeping my voice incredibly light, almost conversational. Who did you use for the underwriting? You have terrible credit, Richard. It must have been a subprime lender. Through Vanguard Fidelity, perhaps. Richard's eyes widened slightly, thrown off balance by my sudden calm demeanor and terrifyingly accurate guess. He puffed out his chest, refusing to look weak. Yes, Vanguard Fidelity. They processed the equity loan this morning. The funds are already transferred to the venue, so you can wire the reimbursement directly to my personal account. I picked up my purse and stood up from the table. I looked down at the two people who had spent 30 years making me feel completely worthless. I am not wiring you anything, Richard, I said, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. And you should really read the fine print on those subprime loan agreements before you sign them. Vanguard Fidelity specializes in high-risk debt. They bundle their bad debt portfolios and auction them off to private corporate entities to mitigate their institutional risk. Brenda frowned, looking back and forth between me and Richard. What is she talking about? What does that mean? It means, I said, looking directly into my father's suddenly terrified eyes, that Vanguard just sold their entire regional bad debt portfolio 30 minutes ago. They sold it to a private holding LLC. A holding LLC that I fully own and operate. I leaned down, resting my hands on the table, bringing my face inches from his. I literally own your debt, Richard. I own the mortgage on your house. And the moment you miss a single payment, I am going to foreclose on the property and evict you myself. Enjoy the party. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in a suffocating, catastrophic silence. The drive back to my house was accompanied by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windshield. I felt lighter than I had in years. The toxic, suffocating grip my parents had maintained over my life was officially broken. I had severed the cord with surgical precision, but the house was still infected. I walked into my home office, double-checked the encryption status on my federal terminal, and waited for the inevitable fallout. I knew my parents would have called Julian the second I walked out of that upscale bistro. I knew they would spin a frantic, desperate narrative demanding he take immediate, drastic action to neutralize me before I could make good on my threats. I made a fresh pot of dark roast coffee and settled into my heavy leather chair. The house was completely silent, but the digital traps I had set were humming with intense activity. Julian did not return until nearly 2 in the morning. The heavy thud of the solid oak front door slamming shut echoed through the empty house, followed by his unsteady, aggressive footsteps pounding down the hardwood hallway. He did not bother to knock. He burst into my office, bringing with him the stench of stale, imported champagne, expensive cigars, and Chloe's distinct cloying jasmine perfume. His silk tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his hair slightly disheveled. His face was flushed red, but not just from the alcohol. He was radiating the intoxicating thrill of absolute unchecked victory. He had spent the entire evening celebrating his perceived genius. He genuinely believed he had successfully secured his financial future, completely outsmarted his wealthy wife, and guaranteed a life of absolute luxury with his mistress. He looked down at me sitting calmly behind my desk, his eyes narrowing with a familiar, hateful contempt. He marched forward and slammed a thick, heavily bound stack of legal documents directly onto my keyboard. "Sign them," he demanded, his voice slurred but dripping with absolute malice. "I am completely done playing house with a frigid, unhinged lunatic." I met with my lawyers this afternoon. We are filing for immediate, aggressive dissolution of the marriage. I looked down at the thick stack of papers. The bold, black letters across the top page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." I did not reach for them. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, my posture perfectly straight. "I am taking 50% of absolutely everything, Adeline," he sneered, leaning over the desk to invade my personal space, relying on his physical size to intimidate me. "I am taking half of your precious accounting firm. I am taking the primary residence. I am taking the investment portfolios. And you are going to pay me permanent aggressive alimony for the rest of your miserable life. My lawyers are going to completely bleed you dry. You will be lucky if you can afford a studio apartment when I am finished with you." He paced back and forth across the Persian rug, gesturing wildly, completely drunk on his own manufactured power. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to beg for mercy. He desperately wanted the hysterical broken wife he had been describing to everyone for months to finally make an appearance. "If you even think about fighting me on this, I will destroy your professional reputation," he threatened, stopping to point a shaking finger directly at my face. "I will drag you through a public, humiliating trial, and do not think your parents are going to save you. Richard and Brenda have already formally agreed to testify on my behalf. They are providing sworn affidavits detailing your severe mental instability, your paranoid delusions, and your complete psychological collapse. They know you are unfit. They are completely on my side. You have absolutely no one." He crossed his arms over his chest, a smug, vicious smile stretching across his face. He had played what he believed was his ultimate trump card. He expected me to shatter into a million pieces at the revelation that my own parents had sold me out for a luxury car and a country club party. He was entirely unaware that I had already foreclosed on their future. He was entirely unaware that my personal assets had been legally shielded in a blind federal trust weeks ago. He was entirely unaware that the accounting firm he wanted half of was currently acting as a heavily monitored operational front for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He wanted 50% of my assets. He was legally demanding 50% of a massive, active federal sting operation. By aggressively demanding these assets, he was voluntarily attaching his name to a mountain of classified radioactive debt and fraudulent offshore ledgers. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I did not utter a single word of protest. I simply reached across the desk and picked up my heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc fountain pen. I pulled the divorce petition toward me. I flipped directly to the last page, bypassing dozens of pages of extortionate demands and fabricated legal threats. I pressed the gold nib to the thick paper and signed my name on the dotted line with a smooth, unwavering flourish. I initialed the required addendums. I dated the bottom of the page. I capped the pen, set it down on the desk with a soft click, and pushed the signed documents back across the mahogany desk toward him. Julian froze. The smug, victorious sneer completely vanished from his flushed face, instantly replaced by absolute, unadulterated shock. He stared at the signed papers, completely disoriented by my total immediate compliance. His alcohol-addled brain struggled to comprehend why the notoriously fierce, combative woman he had married had just handed over her entire life without a single fight. He blinked rapidly, reaching out to grab the paperwork as if he expected it to spontaneously combust. He clutched the documents to his chest quickly, masking his deep confusion with a mask of sneering, aggressive arrogance. "Smart girl," he spat, his voice lacking its previous booming volume. "You finally realized you are completely outmatched. I want you out of this house. Pack your bags by tomorrow morning. I am changing the locks at noon." I remained perfectly still in my leather chair. I looked up at him, my expression completely blank, my eyes cold and dead. I let the silence stretch out, let the unnatural stillness of the room press heavily against his sudden lingering unease. "I will see you at the party tomorrow, Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of any human emotion. "I have a very special gift for the baby." The Oak Ridge Country Club was a monument to old money and exclusivity, and the Grand Imperial Ballroom had been transformed into a grotesque shrine of stolen wealth. I stood in the grand foyer just out of sight, watching the sickening spectacle unfold through the open double doors. Julian had spared absolutely no expense swiping those monitored FBI platinum cards with reckless abandon to construct this lavish lie. A massive life-sized ice sculpture of a baby carriage dominated the center of the room, surrounded by a towering pyramid of imported crystal champagne coupes. Waitstaff in immaculate white tuxedos circulated smoothly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and truffle appetizers. The guest list was a calculated mix of Marcus's elite architectural colleagues, highly influential local politicians, and a heavy contingent of Julian's former tech executives. They were all completely oblivious to the fact that they were currently drinking champagne funded by federal wire fraud. At the center of it all stood my sister. Chloe was holding court beneath a massive crystal chandelier, wearing a powder blue custom couture gown that clung perfectly to her post-pregnancy figure. She held the baby in her arms like a highly priced accessory, offering practiced, radiant smiles to the wealthy wives who stopped to coo over the infant. She looked absolutely triumphant. She was living out her ultimate high society fantasy, completely convinced that her fake interior design company in the Cayman Islands had secured her a lifetime of effortless luxury. Not far from her, my parents were actively working the room, eagerly absorbing the residual prestige. Richard stood by the private bar, laughing loudly and aggressively, slapping the shoulder of a prominent real estate developer. Brenda was clutching the arm of a tech billionaire's wife, boasting with unchecked arrogance. "Chloe has just been so incredibly blessed." My mother gushed, her voice carrying over the soft string quartet playing in the corner. "Her interior design consultancy is practically running itself right now. She has an eye for luxury that you simply cannot teach. And Marcus is just the most wonderful provider. We are a very close, very blessed family." She took a sip of her champagne, actively ignoring the fact that Richard had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on their family home just to ensure this specific display of wealth occurred. A mortgage I now legally owned. They were standing in a room built on lies, financed by theft, and completely devoid of reality. Julian was working the other side of the ballroom. He was holding a glass of 20-year-old scotch, his chest puffed out in a tailored Italian suit. He was smiling broadly, shaking hands with the tech executives he had actively embezzled from. He was playing the role of the magnanimous uncle, the successful software salesman, the man who had effortlessly discarded his mentally unstable wife just hours ago. He looked invincible. He looked like a man who had successfully conquered the world. It was time to shatter his illusion. I stepped out from the shadows of the foyer and walked directly into the Grand Imperial Ballroom. I did not look like the hysterical broken woman Julian had been describing to everyone for the past 6 months. I did not look like a wife who had just signed away her entire life in a tearful panic. I wore a sleek, floor-length emerald green gown that fit like a second skin, paired with stiletto heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless twist, and my posture was absolute predatory perfection. I looked like a woman walking into a corporate boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. The effect was immediate. The soft murmur of conversation near the entrance abruptly died. Heads began to turn. The tech executives who knew me from Julian's previous corporate events stared in outright confusion. This was not the raving lunatic they had been warned about. Whispers rippled outward, carrying quickly across the elegant room. Julian caught the shift in the atmosphere. He turned around, his smile still plastered on his face and his eyes locked onto mine. The color drained from his cheeks with a violent suddenness. His arrogant posture collapsed. He practically shoved past a wealthy investor, setting his scotch glass down on a passing waiter's tray with a harsh clatter. Panic, raw and unfiltered, flashed in his eyes. He intercepted me near the towering champagne pyramid, positioning his body to physically block my line of sight to the rest of the room. He leaned in close, his face twisting into a mask of desperate, furious panic. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening register. "You signed the papers. We are done. I told you to pack your bags and get out of my house. You are going to ruin everything. Turn around and walk out that door right now before I call security and have you dragged out in front of all these people for trespassing." I did not take a single step back. I looked up at him, my expression perfectly serene, totally immune to his aggressive posturing. "I am not trespassing, Julian. I am attending my sister's party. I told you I had a gift for the baby." Julian's jaw clenched. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight silk collar. "You are insane," he spat, stepping even closer, trying to use his height to force me backward toward the exit. "I am not playing this game with you today, Adeline. Get out of here before I make a scene that you will never recover from. You have absolutely no power here." Before he could take another aggressive step, a shadow fell over his right side. Marcus stepped out from the crowd. He did not say a word at first. He simply reached out and placed a heavy, firm hand directly onto Julian's shoulder. The grip was not friendly. It was a vice of solid, unyielding pressure, a physical manifestation of an unspoken, lethal threat. Julian froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at the man whose wife he had stolen, whose child he had fathered, and whose corporate party he was currently hijacking. Marcus's face was a mask of terrifyingly calm composure. His eyes were completely devoid of warmth. There was no trace of the exhausted, doting husband who had been easily manipulated the day before. He looked at Julian with the cold, calculating precision of a man who held all the cards and was actively enjoying the moment before the slaughter. "Let her pass," Julian Marcus said, his voice smooth, low, and echoing with absolute terrifying authority. "She is the guest of honor." Julian swallowed hard. A bead of cold sweat broke out along his hairline. He looked from Marcus's dead, calm eyes to my perfectly serene smile. The arrogant certainty that had fueled him all morning completely evaporated. For the first time since this entire twisted conspiracy began, Julian finally realized that he was not the one orchestrating the game. He was the prey, and the trap had just snapped shut. Julian stepped back awkwardly, his designer shoes scuffing against the polished marble. His throat worked visibly as he swallowed the bile rising in his chest. Marcus did not break eye contact. He simply shifted his weight forward, and the subtle, dominant movement was enough to send Julian retreating toward the edge of the dance floor in total submission. Marcus offered me his arm with the elegant grace of a true gentleman. I took it, allowing him to escort me right into the heart of the grand imperial ballroom. The string quartet shifted into a lively, upbeat tempo, attempting to mask the sudden ripple of intense, uncomfortable tension that followed my entrance. Waiters paused mid-step with their heavy silver trays. Tech executives whispered feverishly behind their expensive crystal glasses, pointing in my direction. I ignored them all, keeping my chin elevated and my gaze fixed forward. Marcus guided me to the VIP table situated directly in front of the raised mahogany stage. Brenda and Richard were already seated there, reveling in the attention. My mother nearly choked on her beluga caviar when I took the empty chair beside her. Richard turned a mottled, dangerous shade of crimson and opened his mouth to bark an order, but a single, flat, terrifying look from Marcus kept him firmly planted in his seat. A sharp ringing sound cut through the low hum of the crowded ballroom. Chloe was standing center stage, tapping a silver spoon against her champagne flute to command the room. The space immediately fell quiet. The heavy velvet curtains behind her had been pulled back to reveal a massive high-definition projection screen. It was currently displaying a looping slideshow of Chloe holding the baby in various stylized, highly edited, obscenely expensive maternity shoots. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our precious little blessing," Chloe announced. Her voice was amplified through the state-of-the-art sound system, ringing out with a sickeningly sweet, practiced pitch that grated on my nerves. She cradled the baby against her chest, swaying gently for the benefit of the watching audience. Family is the absolute foundation of everything we do. Without the unwavering love and incredible financial generosity of my amazing parents, Richard and Brenda, none of this beautiful life would be possible. She paused to blow a dramatic kiss to our parents. Brenda beamed with profound arrogance, pressing a hand to her chest. Richard raised his glass, playing the role of the wealthy, proud patriarch to absolute perfection. Chloe continued, her voice dripping with artificial cloying emotion. "And to my wonderful husband, Marcus, you have been my absolute rock. You work so hard to provide this beautiful, perfect life for us." I glanced sideways at Marcus. He was staring directly at Chloe with a look of absolute glacial indifference. He raised his glass in a slow mock salute, a gesture so loaded with dark, lethal irony that only he and I understood its true weight. Chloe did not notice the danger radiating from him. She was entirely too busy basking in the spotlight. She spent another 5 excruciating minutes thanking everyone from her manicurist to her fake design clients. She meticulously and deliberately omitted my name from her extensive list of supportive family members. It was a highly calculated snub, a petty maneuver designed to publicly establish my status as the jealous outcast. "Now I want to hand the microphone over to someone very special," Chloe concluded, her brilliant smile widening perfectly for the photographer hovering near the stage. "My brother-in-law, Julian. He has stepped up in ways I cannot even begin to describe." Julian took the stairs to the stage 2 at a time, desperately eager to reclaim his shattered ego. He took the microphone from Chloe, offering her a lingering, highly inappropriate hug that made several observant guests in the front row shift uncomfortably in their seats. He turned to the crowd, flashing his signature software salesman smile. It was strained tightly at the edges, but he pushed through the panic. "Being an uncle is a profound, life-changing responsibility." Julian began pacing the stage like a visionary keynote speaker at a major tech conference. "It is about protecting the future. It is about ensuring that this beautiful child grows up surrounded by stability, wealth, and people who are completely sound of mind." He paused dramatically, letting his gaze fall directly on me. He was trying to assert dominance. He was trying to publicly brand me as the unstable, irrational wife he was so bravely discarding. "We all have a sacred duty to build a legacy," he continued, his voice swelling with manufactured arrogant pride. "And I promise to always be the exact man this family needs me to be." The crowd offered a polite, wealthy round of applause. Julian raised his glass high into the air, soaking in the unearned validation. He was so completely absorbed in his own performance that he did not see me stand up. I did not rush. I walked toward the stage with slow, deliberate, predatory steps. The heavy emerald silk of my gown whispered against the marble floor. The polite applause rapidly died out, replaced by a sudden, heavy, suffocating silence. Hundreds of eyes tracked my movement. Chloe stepped back, her radiant smile freezing into a stiff mask of pure terror. Julian slowly lowered his glass, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the microphone stand. I climbed the short flight of carpeted stairs and walked directly up to Julian. He was entirely paralyzed. He could not run, he could not scream, he could not do anything to stop me. I reached out and calmly, effortlessly pulled the microphone from his rigid, sweating fingers. I turned to face the vast ballroom. The silence was absolute. I looked at the sea of wealthy investors, the elite local politicians, my horrified parents sitting rigidly at their table, and the man who mistakenly thought he had ruined my life. "I didn't bring a Porsche," I said. My voice echoed through the massive speakers, crystal clear and utterly devoid of mercy. The words hung heavily in the air, sharp and deadly. Chloe let out a tiny, strangled gasp. Brenda covered her mouth with both trembling hands. "But I did bring a document that will secure this child's future. I continued my tone completely conversational, as if I were presenting a routine quarterly earnings report to a board of directors. I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a small encrypted silver flash drive. I turned to the audiovisual technician who was hovering nervously at the edge of the stage. I handed the drive directly to him. Play the primary file, I instructed him with absolute authority. The technician, deeply intimidated by the sheer gravity of the moment, fumbled hastily with his laptop. A second later, the curated slideshow of Chloe's expensive maternity photos vanished. The massive projection screen behind us flickered black for a fraction of a second, and then a high-resolution, meticulously scanned PDF document filled the massive display. The black text was large enough to be read clearly from the very back of the ballroom. It was the official legally notarized DNA paternity test results from the premier private medical clinic in the city. The critical names were clearly highlighted in bright, undeniable neon yellow. Chloe's name, Julian's name, and the final catastrophic percentage printed in bold, undeniable ink at the bottom of the page. A 99.9% match. A collective deafening shockwave ripped through the grand imperial ballroom. Dozens of guests gasped aloud in unison. A wealthy woman in the second row dropped her crystal champagne glass. It shattered violently against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot through the silence. Richard shot out of his VIP chair, his face entirely drained of blood. Brenda swayed dangerously in her seat, looking like she was about to faint right into her caviar. I turned back to the horrified crowd. I raised my own glass, catching the bright light of the crystal chandelier above us. "Let's raise a glass to Julian," I announced into the microphone, my voice ringing out powerfully over the rising tide of chaotic, panicked murmurs. "He's not just a great uncle. He's the biological father." The absolute silence that followed my declaration lasted for exactly 3 seconds. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic natural disaster. Then the grand imperial ballroom violently fractured. A collective, deafening gasp ripped through the crowd of hundreds of wealthy guests, tech executives, and elite politicians. The polite, refined veneer of the country club instantly dissolved into a ravenous frenzy. Smartphones materialized from designer clutches and tailored suit jackets. The harsh, brilliant flashes of camera lenses began strobing across the room, capturing every single second of the spectacular implosion of the flawless Addams family. Whispers escalated into outright shouts. People were pointing, their faces contorted in a mix of profound horror and undeniable morbid thrill. Near the VIP table, the physical toll of the revelation struck my parents. Brenda, who had spent the last decade carefully curating an image of untouchable maternal perfection, let out a strangled, pathetic sound. Her fingers went completely slack. The expensive crystal champagne coupe she had been holding plummeted to the floor. It hit the polished marble and shattered violently, sending sharp shards of glass and expensive vintage champagne spraying across the toes of Richard's imported leather shoes. Richard did not even flinch at the impact. He stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, his complexion turning a sickly, mottled gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire empire burn to ashes in front of his eyes. He knew immediately what this meant for his social standing. But it was Chloe who truly unraveled. The golden child, the perfect younger sister who had never faced a single consequence in her entire pampered life, finally shattered. Her powder blue custom couture gown suddenly looked ridiculous as her face drained of all color, turning a horrifying pale shade of green. She clutched the infant to her chest, her knuckles white, her eyes darting wildly around the room as she registered the hundreds of camera phones pointed directly at her. She could not handle the exposure. She could not handle being the villain in her own meticulously crafted fairy tale. She stepped forward, her voice tearing through the ambient noise in a shrill, desperate shriek. "She is lying!" Chloe screamed, her face contorting into a mask of pure, vicious panic. Her voice cracked, lacking the sweet, melodious pitch she had used for her toast just moments ago. "Look at her. Look at what she is doing. She forged that document. She is a sick, twisted liar." The crowd murmured, some people exchanging uncertain glances, but the massive 99.9% match glaring from the projection screen behind me was an impossible obstacle for her to overcome. The seal of the premier private clinic was undeniable. "Do not believe a word she says!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. Her mask was completely gone, revealing the ugly, spoiled core I had known my entire life. She forged it because she is a barren, jealous psycho. She has always been jealous of me. She could not give Julian a baby. She is broken. She is empty inside. She is just trying to destroy my family because she is entirely incapable of building her own. Her words were designed to be a lethal strike, a targeted attack on my deepest, most agonizing vulnerability. A year ago, that insult would have brought me to my knees. It would have sent me running from the room in blinding tears. But standing on that stage, bathed in the harsh light of the projector, I felt absolutely nothing but cold clinical detachment. I did not shed a tear. I did not look away. I simply stared down at her from the stage, letting the entire ballroom witness the grotesque, hysterical reality of the golden child. Her desperate weaponization of my infertility only cemented her cruelty in the eyes of the watching elite. The lack of reaction from me pushed Julian over the edge. He had watched his carefully constructed reality evaporate in a matter of seconds. The tech executives he had been trying to impress were currently recording his public humiliation. The wealthy lifestyle he thought he had secured was evaporating. The sheer, overwhelming reality of his complete destruction snapped whatever fragile restraint he had left. He transitioned instantly from a panicked, cornered animal into an enraged, violent predator. His face flushed a dark, dangerous purple. The veins in his neck stood out like thick cords. He let out a guttural, furious roar that silenced the immediate area around the stage. "I am going to kill you, you crazy bitch!" Julian bellowed, his voice echoing violently across the ballroom. He lunged forward. He shoved past a terrified waiter, knocking a silver tray of caviar to the floor. His fists were tightly clenched at his sides, his eyes wide and unhinged. He charged directly toward the short flight of stairs leading up to the stage. The wealthy guests standing in his path scrambled backward, desperate to get out of the way of his violent, unchecked rage. Several women screamed. I did not move a single muscle. I stood my ground at the edge of the stage, the microphone hanging loosely from my hand. I watched him charge, my posture straight, my expression entirely serene. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Julian reached the bottom of the stage steps. He planted his foot, preparing to launch his heavy frame upward to reach me. He never made it to the first step. Before Julian could shift his momentum upward, a solid mass of dark fabric and coiled muscle intersected his path with terrifying, brutal precision. Marcus moved with a speed that defied his large, imposing frame. He did not shout. He did not issue a warning. He simply acted with the cold, efficient violence of a man who had reached the absolute limit of his patience. Marcus stepped directly into Julian's blind spot. He grabbed Julian by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit, halting his violent forward charge with a sickening jolt. Julian let out a choked gasp of surprise as his feet literally left the marble floor. Marcus pivoted his hips, using Julian's own aggressive momentum against him, and drove the software salesman backward with devastating force. He slammed Julian directly onto a tall glass-topped cocktail table positioned near the edge of the dance floor. The impact was explosive. The thick, tempered glass top of the table instantly shattered into thousands of jagged pieces. The heavy metal base buckled and collapsed under their combined weight. Julian crashed onto the polished marble floor amid a rain of broken glass, spilled champagne, and shattered ice. He let out a breathless, agonizing groan, clutching his ribs as the wind was entirely knocked out of his lungs. The ballroom plunged into a shocked, terrified silence. The only sound was the sharp, crystalline tinkling of glass settling onto the floor. Marcus slowly stood up to his full height. He did not look down at the groaning, pathetic mess of a man bleeding onto the expensive floor. Instead, Marcus calmly reached up and adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit jacket. He smoothed out a small wrinkle on his lapel with meticulous, deliberate care. The sheer, unbothered calm of his actions was far more terrifying than the physical violence he had just inflicted. He turned away from Julian's broken form. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus rotated his body to face the center of the room. His eyes bypassed the shocked crowd. His gaze locked directly onto his wife. Chloe stood frozen, trembling violently, the baby clutched tightly against her chest. Marcus stared at her, his face a chilling, unreadable mask. The spell of shock broke. The ballroom erupted into a ravenous, chaotic frenzy. Hundreds of wealthy guests, prominent architects, and elite politicians simultaneously pulled out their smartphones. The harsh, brilliant flashes of camera lenses began strobing across the elegant space, capturing every single second of the spectacular implosion of the flawless Addams family. Whispers escalated into outright shouts. People were pointing, their faces contorted in a mix of profound horror and undeniable morbid thrill. Chloe realized she was losing control of the narrative. She shifted the baby to one hip, forcing a loud, ragged sob from her throat. Tears immediately spilled over her perfectly contoured cheeks as she rushed forward, her stiletto heels clicking frantically against the floor. She reached out with her free hand, desperately trying to grab Marcus's lapel. "Marcus, please, it is a lie," she screamed, her voice tearing through the ambient noise in a shrill, desperate shriek. "She is lying. She forged that entire document to destroy us. You know how jealous she is of me. You know she is a barren, jealous psycho. She cannot give a man a child, so she is trying to ruin our perfect family. Please, baby, you have to believe me." Marcus did not flinch. He did not pull away immediately. He simply looked down at the hand clutching his tailored suit with utter, unfiltered revulsion. He looked at the baby, a child he had believed was his legacy. And then he looked back into his wife's desperate, lying eyes. He reached up, grabbed her wrist with unyielding force, and physically peeled her trembling fingers off his jacket. He shoved her hand away. "Do not touch me," Marcus commanded. His voice was low, lethal, and completely devoid of the warmth he had showered her with for the past 2 years. Chloe stumbled backward, letting out a wounded gasp. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy wives she had been boasting to just 10 minutes ago. They were all staring at her with naked disgust. Her high society facade had completely evaporated. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his suit. He withdrew a thick, folded legal document printed on heavy premium paper. He did not hand it to her. He held it out and intentionally let it drop. It fluttered through the air and landed directly at the tips of her custom designer shoes. "I did not believe Adeline when she first warned me," Marcus stated, his voice carrying the precise, calculating tone he used to terminate multi-million-dollar construction contracts. "I thought she was lashing out. But I build foundations for a living, Chloe. I know how to check for structural integrity. I had my own private physician run a secondary, highly secure DNA panel on the baby last week. I expedited the results." "You are done, Chloe." Chloe's jaw dropped. The breath hitched violently in her throat as she stared down at the sealed legal paperwork resting on the floor. Marcus turned slightly, ensuring his voice carried to the surrounding crowd, making his next move a matter of undeniable public record. "That is a formal petition for an immediate annulment. The legal grounds are severe documented paternity fraud and deliberate malicious misrepresentation. Because you knowingly lied about the paternity of this child to secure a marriage, our prenuptial agreement is completely, irrevocably voided." Chloe let out a high-pitched, hysterical keen. "No, Marcus, you cannot do this. I am your wife. This is our life." "You are nothing," Marcus corrected smoothly. "You violated the primary morality clause of the contract. You are entitled to absolutely zero of my personal assets. You get no alimony. You get no property settlements. You get no access to the offshore accounts. The platinum credit cards in your purse were permanently deactivated 20 minutes ago. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing." He looked down at Julian, who was still trying to push himself up from the ruined cocktail table, his expensive suit soaked in champagne and blood. "And you can take your software salesman with you," Marcus added, his lip curling in disgust. "I am sure the two of you will be very happy together once the federal investigators are finished picking over his rotting ledgers." Marcus did not wait for a response. He turned his back on his ruined wife, adjusted his suit jacket one final time, and walked calmly out of the grand imperial ballroom. The crowd parted for him, instantly making way for the man who had just publicly executed the most ruthless, efficient divorce in the history of the country club. Chloe collapsed to her knees, the heavy silk of her couture gown pooling into the spilled alcohol and broken glass. She wailed a loud, ugly, unfiltered sound of pure, selfish devastation. She had lost her limitless bank account. She had lost her social standing. She had lost everything. The shock finally wore off my parents. The sheer magnitude of the social and financial catastrophe registered in their greedy minds. The golden child was destroyed. Their endless supply of Marcus's wealth was completely shut off. Their second mortgage was suddenly a very real, very terrifying threat. And they desperately needed someone to blame. Brenda and Richard ignored Chloe weeping on the floor. They ignored Julian bleeding from his hands. They turned in unison and marched directly toward the stage. Their faces were contorted into identical masks of violent, irrational, narcissistic rage. "You ruined your sister's life," Brenda screamed, pointing a trembling, accusing finger up at me. Her voice was shrill, completely abandoning any pretense of country club manners. "You vindictive, miserable little monster! You deliberately humiliated us in front of the entire city because you cannot stand to see anyone else happy." Richard slammed his fist against the edge of the stage, his face a terrifying shade of purple. "You are completely dead to us, Adeline. Do you hear me? Dead. You have no family. You have no one. You think you are so smart standing up there ruining everything. But Julian is going to take everything you own. He is going to strip your accounting firm down to the studs in the divorce. He will take the house. He will take the accounts. You are going to be left with nothing but your own miserable, lonely existence." I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life feeding me to the wolves. They were still clinging to the desperate, pathetic illusion that they possessed some kind of authority over me. They genuinely believed that their rejection was a punishment. They genuinely believed Julian was a conqueror who was about to seize my wealth and hand it over to them. I did not step back. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the wooden podium. I looked down into my mother's furious, hateful eyes. I let a slow, terrifying smile stretch across my face. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of absolute predatory anticipation. "Oh, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, chilling whisper that carried effortlessly through the microphone and echoed across the silent, watching ballroom. "I am just getting started." My parents took a physical step back, finally sensing the absolute zero temperature of the room. The terrifying certainty in my voice pierced right through their thick delusion. But before my father could formulate another empty, pathetic threat, the sound of crunching glass drew every eye back to the dance floor. Julian was pushing himself up from the wreckage of the cocktail table. A jagged slice had opened across his cheek and blood dripped down his chin, staining the pristine white collar of his tailored shirt. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a bright red smear across his skin. Despite the total public humiliation, his toxic ego refused to stay down. He straightened his ruined jacket, ignoring the horrified gasps of the wealthy guests who were actively stepping away from him. He puffed out his chest, desperately clawing back his alpha status. "Fine." Julian spat, his voice harsh and echoing violently without the microphone. "The lie is out. We love each other. We have a child together. Something you could never give me because you are completely broken." He pointed a blood-stained finger at me, his face twisting into an ugly, triumphant sneer. "You think you won today, Adeline? You think flashing a paternity test makes you the victor here? Tomorrow morning, the moment those divorce papers are processed, I am going to gut you. We live in a community property state. I will be funding our beautiful new life with exactly half of your miserable little accounting firm. I am going to take your house. I am going to take your retirement accounts. I am going to leave you with absolutely nothing, and Chloe and I are going to spend your hard-earned money raising our son." A wave of disgusted murmurs washed over the crowd. Even Richard and Brenda looked momentarily stunned by the sheer brazen greed of his declaration. Julian smiled, exposing blood-stained teeth. He actually thought he still held a winning hand. He actually believed that the law would reward his betrayal with a massive financial settlement. He thought he could bully me into submission, just like he had tried to do for the last 5 years. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or throw a tantrum. I simply reached into the hidden pocket of my emerald gown and pulled out a small, sleek presentation remote. "You always did underestimate what I do for a living, Julian," I said, my voice projecting crystal clear through the ballroom speakers. "I am not just a miserable little accountant. I am a certified forensic auditor. And when a forensic auditor suspects her husband is lying, she does not just check his text messages. She checks his ledgers." I clicked the button on the remote. On the massive, high-definition screen behind me, the scandalous DNA test vanished. In its place, a complex, highly detailed series of bank statements, routing numbers, and offshore corporate registrations illuminated the room. The numbers were massive, glaring in bright red ink. Dates, times, and account names were laid bare for the entire elite crowd to read. A sudden sharp shout erupted from the back of the room. It was the CEO of Julian's software firm, a man who had been sipping champagne and laughing at Julian's jokes just moments ago. He dropped his glass, his eyes wide with recognition, as he stared at the corporate accounts displayed on the screen. "You mean the life funded by the $2 million you embezzled from your own tech firm?" I asked, stepping right to the edge of the stage. My tone was conversational, yet it carried the heavy, lethal weight of an executioner's blade. "You really thought you were a genius, didn't you? Setting up a fake interior design consultancy in the Cayman Islands for Chloe. You routed company funds through a series of untraceable shell corporations, disguising them as vendor payments for phantom software development, and dumped them right into her offshore account." Julian stopped moving. The arrogant sneer vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. He stared at the screen, watching his perfectly hidden financial crimes exposed in blinding high definition. Chloe let out a strangled gasp. She looked at Julian, the illusion of her wealthy, successful lover instantly shattering. She was not a brilliant design consultant. She was a money mule. "You thought you were so clever when you used those monitored platinum credit cards to pay for this extravagant party." I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, letting the trap snap shut on his ankles. "You thought you were swiping Marcus's money, but Marcus canceled those cards this morning. You panicked. The caterers needed payment. The venue required a deposit, so you used the backup accounts. The funds that paid for this ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the beluga caviar, and that ridiculous ice sculpture all came from the accounts I deliberately left open for you. They were bait, Julian." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him, watching his soul leave his body. "You just wired stolen corporate funds across state lines to pay for a country club event. That is wire fraud. That is money laundering. That is a direct violation of federal law." I did not just file for divorce today. I handed over a 400-page dossier to the authorities detailing every single fraudulent transaction you and my sister have made over the last 2 years. The ballroom fell into a dead, absolute silence. No one breathed. The tech executives Julian had worked with were staring at him with open hostility and pure shock. Richard and Brenda turned to look at their golden child, realizing that Chloe was a willing accomplice in a massive federal crime. Their precious daughter was going to federal prison. Julian's bravado completely vanished. His body seemed to physically deflate, the arrogant posture crumbling into dust. The realization of his absolute ruin struck him with the force of a freight train. His knees literally buckled beneath him. He hit the marble floor, kneeling in the wreckage of the cocktail table, his hands trembling violently as he stared up at me. He was completely, irrevocably destroyed. He had no money. He had no job. He had no future. From the back of the Grand Imperial Ballroom, a loud, heavy thud broke the silence. The massive, solid oak double doors of the foyer swung open with violent force. A team of severe, unsmiling men and women marched into the elegant room. They bypassed the terrified waiters and the shocked high society guests with determined, heavy strides. They wore dark tactical gear over their business suits, and the bright yellow letters printed clearly across the backs of their windbreakers read FBI. The federal agents moved with absolute, unyielding purpose. Their heavy tactical boots thudded loudly against the pristine marble floor, an aggressive rhythmic sound that shattered the remaining aristocratic illusion of the country club. The crowd of wealthy elites, influential politicians, and corporate executives instantly scrambled backward, parting like the Red Sea. They bumped into tables and spilled drinks in their desperate haste to avoid any physical proximity to the incoming disaster. The CEO of Julian's software firm stood near the back, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the raid unfold with cold, brutal satisfaction. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe, uncompromising expression, marched directly down the center aisle. He bypassed the mahogany stage completely. He did not even glance in my direction. His eyes were locked with laser precision onto his target. Julian was still kneeling pitifully in the wreckage of the shattered cocktail table. The blood from his sliced cheek dripped steadily onto his torn, soaked Italian silk shirt. He looked up, his eyes wide and vacant, as the shadows of the federal agents fell over him. He did not attempt to run. He did not attempt to fight. The sheer, overwhelming gravity of the federal government descending upon him completely paralyzed his nervous system. Julian Vance, the lead agent, barked, his voice sharp and authoritative, carrying effortlessly to every corner of the dead-silent ballroom. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering." The agent grabbed Julian by the collar of his ruined suit jacket and hauled him violently to his feet. Another agent stepped up behind him, grabbing his wrists and wrenching them forcefully behind his back. The sharp, heavy metallic click of steel handcuffs locking into place echoed through the grand imperial ballroom. It was the sound of absolute, inescapable finality. Julian sagged heavily against the grip of the arresting agents. He was a hollow, pathetic shell of the arrogant software salesman who had just bragged about seizing my accounting firm. He looked around the room, desperately seeking a friendly face, but the tech executives he had tried so hard to impress were actively turning their backs on him. Chloe watched the steel cuffs lock around Julian's wrists. Her mind, entirely programmed for self-preservation and superficial survival, finally comprehended the immediate danger. She realized that the lavish, limitless lifestyle she thought she had secured was dead. But more importantly, she realized that Julian was a rapidly sinking ship, and he was threatening to drag her down into the dark, freezing depths with him. She immediately turned on him, completely abandoning the man she had just claimed to love. "Julian, tell them," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. She took a step toward the federal agents, her hands raised defensively. "Tell them I have absolutely nothing to do with it. Tell them I did not know where the money came from. I am just a mother. I am a victim here. You lied to me." Julian did not say a word to defend her. He simply turned his head and stared at her with dead, empty eyes, offering zero protection. He was looking at his own total ruin, and he was more than willing to let her share the cell block. I gripped the presentation remote tightly in my hand. I stepped down the short flight of carpeted stairs leading off the stage. My stilettos clicked sharply against the marble, a steady, predatory rhythm that drew the attention of the entire room. I walked across the dance floor, my emerald silk gown trailing behind me, until I stood directly over my trembling, hyperventilating sister. The FBI agents paused their procession toward the exit, watching the interaction, but allowing it to happen. "Actually, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly modulated, projecting calm, clinical detachment. "The offshore shell company he used to wash that stolen corporate money is registered exclusively under your name." Chloe gasped, her eyes widening in sheer terror. She shook her head frantically, her perfect blonde hair falling into disarray. "No, I just signed what he told me to sign. I did not know what it was. I am an interior designer." "You are a documented, willing accomplice," I corrected her, stripping away her delusions with surgical precision. "You wanted the title. You wanted to play the role of the brilliant, highly paid consultant running an elite firm in the Cayman Islands. So you happily signed the incorporation papers. Your signature is permanently inked on every single fraudulent corporate tax return for the past 2 fiscal years. You personally authorized the massive wire transfers that paid for this luxury ballroom, the catering staff, and that ridiculous ice sculpture. You did not read the documents because you were entirely blinded by your own greed." Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but her throat seized with panic. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for federal money laundering. I continued, my tone completely merciless. And the IRS Criminal Investigation Division is freezing your personal accounts right now as we speak. Every single cent you thought you owned, every stolen dollar you hid away is gone. You are completely broke. The crushing reality of federal prison finally crashed down on the golden child. The elite social status she had lied, cheated, and betrayed me to achieve evaporated into thin air. Chloe's knees gave out completely. She collapsed onto the hard marble floor, surrounded by the remnants of her shattered fairy tale. She pulled her knees to her chest and began sobbing uncontrollably, loud, ugly, gasping wails that filled the silent room. She was facing federal indictments, and there was no one left to bail her out. The FBI agents firmly guided Julian toward the heavy oak doors, leading him out of the ballroom and into the waiting transport vehicles. Richard watched them leave. He watched his golden daughter weeping pathetically on the floor. He could no longer hide behind his wealthy patriarch persona. He was humiliated, stripped bare, and completely exposed in front of his peers and business associates. His entire social standing had been decimated in less than 20 minutes. The narcissistic rage bubbled up, blinding him to the absolute danger he was in. He needed a target. He needed to blame someone for his own catastrophic failures. He stormed forward, his fists tightly clenched at his sides. His face was a mask of irrational, burning hatred. He marched right up to me, his chest heaving, his eyes practically bulging from his skull. "You monster!" Richard snarled, his voice shaking with furious indignation. "You deliberately set up your own family. You orchestrated this entire circus just to ruin us. You belong in a psych ward. Get out of my sight right now." He pointed a violently shaking finger toward the foyer exit, clinging desperately to his false, pathetic sense of authority. "We still have our home," Richard spat, leaning in close, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "And we will use every single penny of our equity to sue you into the ground. We will destroy you." I looked at the man who had spent my entire life protecting Chloe at my expense. I looked at his red, furious face and his desperate, empty threats. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply smiled, my most terrifying, predatory smile. "Oh, Mom," I said, looking past Richard directly at Brenda, who was staring at me in pure horror. "I am just getting started." Richard's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The vein at his temple throbbed dangerously against his reddening skin. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his expensive cologne entirely failing to mask the sour, desperate stench of his panic. He could not accept defeat. His narcissistic ego simply would not allow it. "You think this little theatrical stunt changes who we are?" Richard bellowed, ensuring his voice carried to the surrounding country club elites. "We are the Addams family. We have a pristine, untouchable reputation in this city. Our estate is worth $1.5 million. I have personally retained the most vicious civil litigators in the state. Come Monday morning, they will freeze your assets, seize your business, and tie you up in court until you are begging us for pocket change." Brenda, recovering a shred of her country club arrogance, stepped up beside her husband. She stepped over Julian's discarded, blood-stained tie, adjusting her diamond necklace with trembling fingers. Her eyes flashed with venomous spite. "You were always a bitter, jealous girl, Adeline. You could never stand seeing your sister shine. But you cannot touch us. Our equity is a fortress. Our social standing is absolute. We will liquidate everything we own just to make sure you are left rotting in the gutter where you belong. We will destroy your life." The ultimate payoff. I let their pathetic threats hang in the stifling air of the ballroom. The elite crowd of architects, politicians, and socialites watched in breathless silence. They shifted their gaze between my furious, out-of-control parents and my absolute terrifying calm. I did not flinch at their threats. I welcomed them. This was the exact moment I had painstakingly planned for over the last 2 years. I unclasped the gold latch of my emerald designer clutch. The soft metallic click echoed loudly in the quiet room. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, professionally bound legal packet printed on heavy premium paper. It was not a prop, it was a loaded weapon. "Your estate," I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue with heavy, deliberate mockery. You speak of your $1.5 million home as if it is an impenetrable fortress, as if those brick walls and manicured lawns can somehow protect you from the consequences of your own pathetic enabling greed. I took a slow, measured step forward, forcing Richard and Brenda to hold my gaze. I wanted them to see the exact moment their entire world collapsed. Tell me, Richard, how exactly do you plan to liquidate an asset you no longer own? Richard opened his mouth to shout another insult, but the words died instantly in his throat. A sudden sickening pallor washed over his face, draining the angry red flush. Brenda looked at him, profound confusion momentarily breaking through her rage. You really thought I was just sitting quietly all these years while you funded Chloe's extravagant lifestyle? I asked, my voice ringing out with lethal, clinical precision. Did you honestly believe I did not notice the sudden influx of cash? The designer handbags, the luxury car leases, the lavish European vacations you practically threw at her to maintain her high society facade. I am a certified forensic auditor, Dad. I track hidden money for a living. I held the document up high, displaying the official bank seal stamped heavily across the front cover. You took out a massive second mortgage on that pristine estate to fund Chloe's delusions. You drained every single drop of your precious equity to keep up appearances and support a lifestyle you could not afford. And when Julian's embezzled money started drying up, when the tech market shifted and the stolen funds got tight, you could not make the payments. I looked directly at Brenda, watching her perfectly contoured face crumble into a mask of pure terror. You defaulted on that second mortgage exactly 3 months ago. You have been hiding the warning letters, intercepting the phone calls from the bank, desperately praying for a miracle that was never going to come. The execution. Vanguard Investments held your bad debt. I announced, my words striking them like physical blows. And Vanguard is notorious for quickly offloading toxic assets to third-party collection agencies. They bundled your defaulted mortgage and sold it to the highest bidder at a steep, desperate discount. Richard stumbled backward, his hands shaking violently at his sides. No, no, that is confidential banking information. That is illegal. You cannot possibly know that. I do not just know it, Richard, I replied smoothly, a cold, victorious smile stretching across my face. I bought it. I set up a proxy limited liability company 6 weeks ago specifically to acquire your bad debt. I am your primary creditor. I own your debt. I own your mortgage. I own your house. A collective gasp swept through the grand imperial ballroom. The high society guests who had previously tolerated my parents were now looking at them with undisguised revulsion. The whispers started immediately harsh and unforgiving. My parents were not just ruined socially. They were financially annihilated in front of the very people they desperately wanted to impress. I flipped open the heavy packet and let it drop. It hit the floor with a loud smack, landing right next to Chloe, who was still weeping uncontrollably in the spilled champagne and broken glass. I filed the formal foreclosure notice at exactly 8 o'clock yesterday morning. I stated, my voice echoing with brutal finality. The grace period is over. The paperwork is fully processed, stamped, and legally binding. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your bags and vacate my property. If you are not gone by Monday morning, I will have the county sheriff physically throw you out onto the street. The absolute crushing gravity of the situation finally registered in Brenda's mind. The loss of her mansion, her country club status, her entire manufactured identity shattered her fragile psyche into a million unrecoverable pieces. Her eyes rolled back into her head. She let out a high-pitched gasp and collapsed completely, her body hitting the marble floor in a lifeless, heavy heap. Richard did not move to help his wife. He did not look at Chloe. He stood completely paralyzed, his mouth hanging open, his face a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. He stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, realizing he had absolutely nothing left. The wealth, the status, the golden child, they were all completely gone. I looked down at the ruined family that had spent my entire life trying to break me. I looked at the people who had called me a monster, who had cast me aside in favor of a liar and a thief. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the profound, deeply satisfying weight of absolute justice. You told me I didn't fit into this family, I said, my voice cutting through the silence one last time. You were right. The silence in the grand imperial ballroom was the last memory I allowed them to have of me. I turned my back on the wreckage of my former life and walked out the door without a single backwards glance. 3 months later, the dust had completely settled, and the landscape of our lives was unrecognizable. The federal justice system moves with agonizing slowness for some, but for Julian the hammer fell with terrifying, unrelenting speed. His arrogant sneer was a distant memory inside the sterile concrete walls of the federal holding center. He had been explicitly denied bail. The presiding judge looked at his offshore flight risk, his deliberate tampering with corporate ledgers, and his utter lack of remorse, and slammed the gavel down hard. Julian was sitting in a scratchy orange jumpsuit, facing a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering. There were no tailored Italian suits in his cell block. There was no vintage champagne. There was only the cold, hard reality of a man who thought he could outsmart the numbers and outplay the certified auditor who slept right next to him. His software firm had completely liquidated his personal assets to recoup their stolen capital. Julian was penniless, disgraced, and utterly alone, trapped in a cage of his own arrogant design. Chloe's spectacular fall from grace was a masterpiece of legal and financial destruction. When the FBI raided the ballroom, they took the Golden Child's platinum credit cards, her designer handbags, and her entire manufactured identity. Marcus had executed the marriage annulment with surgical precision, utilizing the morality and fraud clauses to leave her with absolutely zero access to his vast wealth. But the true devastation came directly from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Because Julian had washed the stolen money through her name, she was facing severe tax fraud and conspiracy charges. Her offshore accounts were frozen instantly. The federal government seized her custom jewelry, her luxury vehicles, and every single asset she had purchased with dirty money to pay off her mounting fines. The high society wives who used to compliment her immediately blocked her number and pretended they had never met her. She became a total social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at country club brunches and charity galas. Today, Chloe was living in a cheap, rundown motel on the desolate outskirts of the city. She spent her days surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the constant rattling hum of a broken air conditioning unit. There were no more lavish spa days. There were no more private jets or exclusive reservations. There was only a mounting stack of federal indictments and the terrifying, inescapable realization that her pretty face could not charm a federal prosecutor. Richard and Brenda suffered the exact fate they had spent their entire lives trying to avoid. They became poor. True to my word, the county sheriff's deputies arrived at their pristine $1.5 million estate exactly 48 hours after the country club disaster. My parents were physically escorted off the manicured lawn, forced to carry whatever they could fit into a few pathetic cardboard boxes, while their neighbors watched from their porches. The Proxy Limited Liability Company I controlled immediately seized the property, sold it at market value to a young tech executive, and used the profits to aggressively expand my accounting firm. The public humiliation completely broke them. The country club revoked their lifetime memberships, immediately citing the massive federal investigation surrounding their daughter and future son-in-law. Their wealthy friends turned their backs, refusing to answer their desperate phone calls for emergency loans. Richard and Brenda were now living in a cramped, dark, one-bedroom apartment next to a noisy, polluted highway. They were drowning in crippling, insurmountable debt, entirely cut off from the endless flow of cash they once demanded from me and expected from Marcus. They spent their days arguing bitterly in a tiny, grease-stained kitchen, blaming each other for the absolute ruin of their golden family. They had bet their entire existence on the wrong daughter, and they had lost everything. I sat at a corner table in an upscale quiet coffee shop downtown, listening to the soft jazz playing gently through the overhead speakers. The morning sun streamed brightly through the large glass windows, catching the steam rising from my black espresso. The brass bell above the door chimed. Marcus walked in. He wore a sharp custom charcoal suit, looking completely rested, commanding, and powerful. The heavy dark circles that used to plague his eyes during his marriage to Chloe were entirely gone. He carried himself with the effortless authority of a man who had reclaimed his life. He spotted me, offered a brief knowing smile, and walked over to take the plush leather seat across from me. We ordered our coffee, in comfortable, easy silence. There was no cheap romance between us. There were no lingering glances, secret affections, or dramatic declarations. There was only the profound, unspoken, mutual respect of two survivors who had successfully excised fatal cancers from their lives. We had both been used, we had both been lied to, and we had both fought back and won. Marcus picked up his ceramic cup, his eyes meeting mine with absolute clarity and calm determination. "To clean slates," Marcus said, his voice smooth and resolute. "To clean slates," I replied, tapping my cup lightly against his. I finished my espresso, offered him a final nod of solidarity, and walked out of the coffee shop. I stepped onto the bright, bustling city streets. The morning air was crisp, energizing, and full of absolute freedom. My phone buzzed continuously in my tailored coat pocket. I glanced at the glowing screen, watching the notifications pile up from new high-paying clients desperate to hire the ruthless forensic auditor who had single-handedly taken down a multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked confidently toward my thriving, expanding firm. They thought I was just a human calculator, a machine meant to fund their delusions. But they forgot the cardinal rule of the world. Numbers never lie, and the house always wins. One profound lesson to take away from this story is that your true worth is never determined by the people who consistently fail to see it, even if those people are your own family. When those closest to you choose manipulation, greed, or conditional love, it is not a reflection of your inadequacies, but rather their limitations. True independence and security are built from within. By stepping away from toxic environments and refusing to accept the role of a scapegoat, you reclaim your power and write your own narrative. Share your journey of overcoming family betrayal in the comments below.